Chapter 336. How dare they? Do they want to start a riot? After a night's rest, Petru had regained his energy. He angrily asked Pinlin, "Great leader, I'll bring 1,000 warriors to bring them back." Pinlin's furrowed forehead formed a deep furrow. He shook his head and loosened his clenched fist. He turned to the high priest and said in a deep voice, "High priest, I'll have to ask you to go. Ask them what they want and try to calm them down." "Great leader," Petru hurriedly shouted, "don't be weak to these guys. Otherwise they will break away from our control, and they may even threaten the safety of Cosenza." As there were only 3 people in the meeting hall, Pinlin, Petru, and Ferroteru, Pinlin's words were not taboo. He looked at the 2 of them with a worried expression and sighed heavily. "The failure of this battle is all my fault. I shouldn't have fought the Dionians with wishful thinking. I thought that even if we couldn't win, given our familiarity with the terrain and the fact that our warriors had lighter equipment than the Greeks, we could easily escape from the battlefield and return to the city to defend against the enemy's siege. I didn't expect that we would suffer such heavy losses in a single battle. Dionia is really different from the other Greek city-states like Crotone. I've let my people down. Great leader, this is not your fault alone. The decision to fight with Dionia was made by the Council of Elders." Petru comforted his father-in-law. He hesitated for a moment and whispered, "Why don't we sue for peace with Dionia?" As soon as this was said, Pinlin and Ferroteru were stunned. "Under such circumstances, will Dionia agree to a truce with us?" Ferroteru expressed his doubt. "No. We can give it a try." Pinlin's eyes lit up. Inspired by Petru's words, he thought further. "Petru, send a messenger to Dionia's camp and tell their governor, Cosenza is willing to be an ally of Dionia, just like Laos. If we can make peace, Cosenza will temporarily become a subsidiary of Dionia, and we can let the captured soldiers return. We still have time to slowly recover our strength. If we can't, we have to negotiate with them patiently. As far as I know, the governor of Dionia is not a tyrannical person, so he has spared Castellan and Crotone. So why can't he loosen the noose around Cosenza's neck? At the very least, it will buy us some time to deal with those people outside the city. Right now, Cosenza can't afford another riot." Cosenza's messenger rushed to Dionia's camp. When the Devers heard the messenger's intention, they immediately pointed out that Cosenza could only be fully integrated into the Dionia alliance. There was no other way. He flatly refused the messenger's request to talk in detail. How could he give Cosenza a chance to breathe when he had the absolute advantage? On the 3rd day after the battle, the entire Dionia army broke camp and marched westward. The cavalry spread out 6 to 7 miles to scout the surroundings. The 1st Legion was the vanguard, armed with armor and weapons. The 2nd Legion was on both sides of the middle of the army, protecting the supply camp, medical camp, and engineering camp in the middle. Under the supervision of the Dionia soldiers, the half-starved Briti prisoners carried the supplies, pushed the carts, and took care of the livestock. The Legion's reserves and the Allies served as the rear guard. The entire army marched in a mighty manner. Even on the vast plateau, it was still impossible to see the end of the army. 3 hours later, the Devers saw the big city in front of them, Cosenza. At this time, the cavalry captain Leds rushed from the front of the army excitedly. "Sir Commander, Legio 4 is rushing towards us." "That's great." The Devers were overjoyed. They excitedly squeezed the horse's abdomen. The war horse raised its hooves and galloped forward. The guards followed closely. Then, the cavalry gathered around to prevent any accidents. The Legio 4 Captain Helos also rushed from the south after receiving the news. When he saw the Devers, he immediately reined in his war horse and saluted. "Sir Commander, Legio 4 has conquered Canopitia. We are here on orders." "Thank you for your hard work." The Devers solemnly returned the salute. The Helos in front of them was no longer the ordinary mercenary that they first met in Persia. The long period of leading troops and handling government affairs had made him more dignified and less humble. He was now a qualified captain of the Legion of Dionysia. "Sir, I'm late. The defense of Canopiscia is very tenacious. Not only did they delay our Legio for a long time, they also made us pay with the lives of more than 700 of our brothers." Helo's expression was slightly sorrowful. The gentleness in his bones had not changed much. "The main reason why Legio 4 took so long to conquer Canopiscia is because of my strategic plan. It's not your fault. The sacrifice of the soldiers was worth it, because you have truly taken a well-defended city head-on. This will be the most valuable military asset of Dionia." The Devers encouraged him. Furthermore, Legio 4 came at the right time. With that, he pointed forward in high spirits. "Let's go. Bring me to the warriors of Legio 4. The Devers and Helos took the lead and galloped forward. Behind them were 200 guards wearing red capes, including 100 warriors from Abyssinia. Rotem held the reins in one hand and raised the glorious flag that Marcius had given him with the other. He followed closely behind the Devers' horse and galloped past the column of Legio 4. The soldiers of Dionia Legio 4 stopped in their tracks and stopped talking. They looked at their supreme commander with burning eyes. The Devers had a solemn expression as they raised their right arm high above their head and stretched it forward as a salute. Suddenly, the soldiers let out thunderous cheers. "Victory to Dionia! Victory to Devers!" This scene made Rotem's blood boil with excitement, but at the same time, it made him envious. He deeply felt that his days of being trapped in the mountains were too boring. A man should be like a commander and gallop on the battlefield. "Listen, that's the new recruits of Legio 4 shouting. I heard that they came from Trine. It seems that they have already conquered Canopiscia. No wonder they are so energetic. If we did not defeat the main force of Bruttii, they would not have been able to conquer the city so easily. These little fellows are still far from that. In the next few days we have to let them know that in the Dionysian army, we, the First Legion, are the strongest." The soldiers of the First Legion looked at the cheers of Legio 4 with the attitude of a veteran. On top of the city wall, the Bruttii soldiers looked at the scene outside the city in fear. The Long Dragon from the northeast and the Long Dragon from the southwest had gathered together and let out deafening cheers. The momentum was so majestic. Penland's expression was solemn. He had received the news of the fall of Canopiscia yesterday and had specially sealed it off. He did not expect the people of Dionia to do such a thing outside the city. Looking at the expressions of the soldiers, he knew that it was a big blow to them. At this moment, Tagli's voice came from behind. "The people of Dionia are so strong. We have too few people. Cosenza city is too big. It is impossible to have a comprehensive defense. It is better to surrender." When Petter heard this, his face turned pale. He wanted to beat the old man up, but he held it in. Yesterday, under the mediation of High Priest Ferodaru, Penland, Tagli, and him reached a settlement. The Bruttii tribal alliance would return the original tribal people of Tagli and the other tribal leaders. They would no longer deprive and interfere with their right. In the end, they also agreed to fight against the people of Dionia with Penland in Cosenza city. There was only one issue that was still being debated. Tagli and the others wanted to abolish the Council of Elders and delegate the authority to deal with the affairs of the alliance to the tribal leaders. For Penland, agreeing to their request meant that the highly centralized Bruttii tribal alliance, which he had been working hard to pursue, would become a loose alliance of tribes. This was something he could not tolerate. Therefore, he used Bergam's absence and Sidorum's disappearance as an excuse to postpone this important issue. This caused dissatisfaction among the other tribal leaders. Now, both sides were at odds with each other on the surface. Faced with the pressure of the army of Dionia and the situation inside Cosenza city, how could they resist the enemy's attack? Penland was also worried. Fortunately, the Devers did not order to attack the city. Instead, they began to build a camp. Relying on the absolute advantage of 30,000 troops, he directly ordered the construction to start a mile away from the city, preparing to besiege Cosenza. The captives were taken to dig trenches. The 1st, 2nd, Legio IV, Legion Reserve, Allied Army. The Devers had enough labor to build a huge barracks and enough manpower to stay alert. Just as the Devers were about to ride around Cosenza City to investigate in detail, Capus came to report. Sidorum asked to see him. "You've decided? Let Vig join Dionia?" The Devers suppressed the joy in their hearts and looked at Sidorum calmly. "Yes, the consul of Dionia." When Sidorum saw the arrival of Dionia Legio IV, he immediately realized that what the Devers told him before was the truth. Dionia did have a strong siege ability. Therefore, he finally stopped hesitating and made up his mind. After relieving the troubles of many days, he felt much more relaxed. Chapter 337. After the last battle, many of my people must have escaped into Cosenza City. They might even be standing on top of the city walls now. Sidorum said carefully, "Logically speaking, I should go to the bottom of the city now and ask them to surrender, or even persuade Penland and the others to give up resistance. However, a wolf king without a pack of wolves will not only not frighten people, but will also become the target of hunters. The people of Cosenza will say that I surrendered to Dionia because I am afraid of death. My people will most likely be determined to fight back in order to wash away their shame. Therefore," Sidorum paused and looked at the Devers earnestly, "I hope to go back to Vig City first and persuade the leaders and people of Vig City to come and join the siege of Cosenza. I believe that it will be more helpful for Dionia to take down Cosenza." The Devers stared at him for a moment and smiled. "How long will it take to get to Vig City from here?" "It will take more than half a day to walk, and less than 3 hours to ride a horse." "Then you will ride a horse and set off immediately. I hope to meet the leaders of Vig City in the camp tomorrow," the Devers said firmly and decisively. Sidorum was shocked and quickly bowed. "As you wish, my lord." Marcius. "Here. Take some guards and send Leader Sidorum safely to the outskirts of Vig City. I believe that after seeing you, Avanogus will not stop Leader Sidorum from entering the city. At the same time, tell the governor of Laos to bring his army and Vig's army here tomorrow." "Understood." Marcius was a little hesitant, "My lord, but here you don't worry, there are other guards and Abyssinia warriors led by Rodum. I will not have any problems." "Yes." After Sidorum left, Tormid quickly asked, "Commander, aren't you worried that he's lying?" The Devers looked at Sidorum's back as he left with a complicated expression. Sidorum is a smart man. There's one thing he didn't mention on purpose. After being reminded by the Devers, Tormid suddenly realized, those Whig prisoners in the camp. This is the hostage he left behind. If a great leader abandons his own people and escapes alone, and the Weigers find out, Sidorum has really put a lot of thought into this. The Devers smiled, her eyes shining. "Actually, I don't care if he's lying or not, because he can't change the outcome of this war alone. Instead, he'll give me a reason to completely destroy the Weigers." That night, it was peaceful inside and outside the city. The next day, Penland, who had not slept the entire night, rushed to the city walls and waited for the Dionia soldiers to attack. The attack did not come, and the Dionia soldiers were still building the camp. But what Penland did not know was that the Devers had already sent the 1st Legion to attack Ambalia. Accompanying them were more than a dozen commanders of the Legio IV, the ballista troops, and Hegesidas. At noon, the soldiers guarding the city of Cosenza were horrified to see an army of about 1,000 people coming from the north. They held the flag of Weigel high and circled around the north, west, and east of Cosenza before finally entering the camp of Dionia. Then, the 2,000 Laos soldiers did the same. This gave the soldiers of Brudi a great shock. Weigel city surrendered. This was especially true for the Wygol soldiers in the city. When they saw the leader of Wygol, Sidorum, and the leader at the front of the army, they clamored to go out of the city to meet up with them. They even clashed with the soldiers of Cosenza who came to stop them, and the two sides confronted each other in the city. Penland was in a dilemma. There were about 800 Wygol soldiers, and the total number of Cosenza soldiers in the city was at most 5,000. Outside the city, there was an army of Dionia eyeing them covetously. He could not transfer all of them to deal with the Wygol, and the other leaders, led by Targli, refused to participate in the encirclement of the Wygol with the reason that Brudi cannot kill each other. At this time, a new situation appeared outside the city. The tribes that had rioted in Cosenza gathered outside the city and shouted to Targli and the others to persuade them to surrender. Just as Targli and the other leaders were hesitating, the leader of Ambalia, Bergam, led a dozen cavalrymen and rushed to the city. Even Ambalia had surrendered, and this fact was a heavy blow to the Brudi soldiers in the city. In fact, it was reasonable for Ambalia, who had very few people in the city, to surrender. When the 7,000 people of the First Legion appeared outside Ambalia, and when the ballistae fired a few stone shells to break the wooden fence, and when Hegesidas surrendered, the series of actions made Bergam, who had less than 1,000 soldiers, quickly make the right choice. Ambalia's surrender made all the Brudi in Cosenza panic even more. In this way, Cosenza was completely surrounded and isolated. Targli and the other leaders finally made up their minds and opened the city to surrender. The Dionia soldiers cheered and rushed into Cosenza. Penland, Petaru, and Kodark had to retreat to the inner city with their own tribal warriors. The city was in chaos. Petaru stumbled into the meeting hall. "Leader," he shouted anxiously. "Leader, damn that Kodark." Kodark opened the city gate and surrendered to the Dionia. Should we? Penland, who was sitting on the wooden chair, did not panic at all. He looked at his son-in-law calmly and said with difficulty, "Surrender to the Dionia." Petaru finally got the answer he wanted. Without hesitation, he said, "Yes," and hurried out. "Petaru." Penland stopped him and said earnestly, "As a leader of the Brudi, you are still too impatient. Next time, think before you do anything," and Penland's voice became a little low. He took a breath and said, "Take care of Una." Petaru heard this and felt a little uneasy. "Father," Pionluan waved his hand. "Hurry up and go. Too many of our people have died." Penland reluctantly watched Petaru's figure disappear outside the hall. He turned around tiredly. The flag of the Brudi Tribal Alliance was hanging on the wall behind him. A snow-capped mountain stood on the green grassland, representing the land where thousands of Brudi were raised and the god Umla who protected them. Penland stepped forward and touched the flag that he had put so much effort into. His mind was full of thoughts. A unified Brudi Tribal Alliance was about to rise on this land, but Dionia? He resentfully repeated the name, his heart full of regret. Of course, he did not know that in the history of his previous life, Brudi became a powerful kingdom a few decades later. Not only did the Greek cities in Greece tremble under its army, but the Lucanians were also afraid of it. Crotone, Tourage, and other Greek cities were weakened by Syracuse's repeated invasions. They had no choice but to invite King Alexander of Epirus to lead an army of tens of thousands to cross the sea to southern Italy in an attempt to destroy Brudi in one fell swoop. In the end, near the Platte River, where Dionia and the Brudi allied army fought, the Brudi army almost completely wiped out the Greek allied army led by Alexander. Since then, the Greek cities in southern Italy could only hide behind the tall walls and live without leaving any records in history until the arrival of the Rome. At this time, Penland took down the flag of the Brudi alliance and slowly wrapped it around his body. Then, he pulled out the short sword at his waist. The day before Penland committed suicide and the Devers occupied all of Brudi, the Legio III led by Hieronymus arrived at the city of Picassus. The people of Picassus, who had no soldiers to defend, opened the city gates and surrendered. When the leader of Potentia, Priamot, heard this news, he finally made up his mind and sent an envoy to Turidge, requesting to join the Dionia alliance. A month later, Metapontum and Galagusso joined the Dionia alliance one after another. At this time, the alliance of Dionia city-states occupied more than half of the land in southern Italy and Lucania, truly becoming the overlord of southern Italy. Note: according to historical data, not confirmed, the Briti were vassals of the Lucanians for a few decades. In the end, they united and established a unified kingdom, becoming independent. At this time, the Greek cities in southern Italy were greatly weakened by the invasion of Dionysius of Syracuse, which facilitated the expansion of the Briti forces in southern Italy. If the readers look at the map of this period, they will see that the territory of the Briti occupied almost the entire Calabria region, except for the Greek cities along the coast. In this book, the existence of Dionia interrupted the rise of the Briti. Of course, it also interrupted the rise of the Lucanians before. I believe that it will do the same in the later chapters. Chapter 338. When the news of Dionia's conquest of Briti reached Syracuse, Dionysius was accompanied by Macias to inspect the construction of the defensive fortress of Syracuse. Seeing that the project was nearing completion, he was in a good mood when he suddenly heard the news. His face immediately became gloomy and he blurted out, "Damn Carthage, they ruin my plan." In the early spring of 397 BC, Carthage Sophie Hilmurco led an army of 100,000 from Carthage. After a small-scale battle with the navy of Syracuse at sea, they successfully landed in Sicily. They quickly bought over the traders and easily captured the city of Alux in the west of Sicily. Then they attacked Moscha and succeeded. Syracuse's army was forced to withdraw from the siege of Segesta. Hilmurco did not take advantage of the victory to pursue. Instead, he destroyed the city of Moscha and built a new city near its seaside. He named it Lilybo. When Carthage's army stopped advancing, the cautious Dionysius stationed his troops in the city of Syracuse. Not long after Hilmurco laid the foundation of the new city of Lilybo, when February came, he led his army to continue to attack eastward. This time, he did not follow the attack route of Syracuse last year. Instead, he took a boat around to the northeast corner of Sicily and easily took down the defenseless Messina. The fall of Messina was a big stimulus to Lygum on the other side of the strait. This Greek city-state, which relied on its favorable geographical location and prosperous port trade, had been secretly communicating with Carthage for many years to prevent Syracuse from coveting the Strait of Messina. Suddenly, the friendly foreign city-state bared its poisonous fangs and captured Lygum's sister city-state, Messina. Why was it a sister city-state? Because Messina was first established by the joint colonization of Cumae and Chalcis. It was originally called Zancle, and later changed its name to Messina because of the arrival of Messenian settlers. The Jonas had long realized that the safety of the other side of the strait could only be guaranteed if it was in their own hands, so they encouraged the mother city of Cumae and the Messenians to establish a friendly city of Lygum. Lygum panicked. They quickly made a decision and sent messengers to the headquarters of the Southern Alliance in Sirius, requesting to join the alliance. At this point, other than Rockley and its affiliated city-states, all the other Greek city-states in Great Hellas had formed an alliance with Dionia. After Hermico completely destroyed Messina, in order to curry favor with the natives of eastern Sicily, the Sycire people, and attack Syracuse together with Carthage, he prepared to build a new city on the southern coast of Messina, Tauromenion, and gift it to the Sycire people. By March, Dionysius felt that he could no longer allow Carthage's people to continue attacking its subordinate city-state. If he did not do something, the alliance states would likely fall to Carthage's side. So he mobilized both land and sea armies and advanced north to the Catania plains. In the waters near Catania, a naval battle broke out between Syracuse and Carthage. Originally, the Greek warships outnumbered Carthage's people and had an advantage in terms of equipment. However, Dionysius's favoritism and his brother Leptinus's mistake as the commander of the navy caused the navy of Syracuse to suffer heavy losses. The Greek army on land watched the naval battle from the shore, but when they saw the miserable state of the navy, their morale began to waver. Fortunately, the land army led by Hermico did not arrive on the battlefield in time, because Mount Etna, to the southwest of Tauromenion, suddenly erupted. High-temperature lava spewed down, destroying the road to the south. Black volcanic ash covered the sky, forcing Carthage's army to take a detour. The Syracuse army sang the praises of Hephaestus along the way in awe, and hurriedly returned to the city of Syracuse. Catania and Leontini fell into Carthage's hands one after another. Hermico finally led his army to Syracuse with the aftermath of the naval battle. The navy of Carthage also sailed into the port of Syracuse, and then they set up camp on the banks of the Aropus River, attempting to besiege Syracuse from land and sea. At this time, Dionysius hurriedly sent messengers to Campania in Italy, Corinth in Greece, and the hegemon of Sparta in order to seek emergency assistance. Although Greece was the closest place to Syracuse, Dionysius intentionally or unintentionally ignored this region, and did not ask for help from the hegemon of southern Italy, Dionia. It was also impossible for Dionia to send troops without an invitation. That would make the Sicilians suspect that they had ulterior motive. Moreover, Dionia also needed time to rest, consolidate, and reorganize after going through frequent wars and rapid expansion. Therefore, when the Greek city-states in Sicily were facing the danger of falling, the people of Dionia and the Greeks of southern Italy watched from the sidelines with complicated feelings. Greek reinforcements from all over the country arrived, especially the young general of Sparta, Phoebidas, led 30 warships and 500 Sparta warriors. At this time, the citizens of Syracuse started a riot under the instigation of someone with ulterior motives. They wanted to oust Dionysius from his position. Phoebidas led the Greek coalition army from all over the country to stop the riot, but they complained to Phoebidas that it was because of Dionysius's poor command that Syracuse was in trouble, and the citizens lost their loved ones. At the same time, they recounted Dionysius's brutal rule in the country, and begged their ally, Sparta, to help them get rid of the shackles of this tyrant. Phoebidas remembered Agesilaus' warning, and told them with a straight face, Sparta's mission in Syracuse was to help Dionysius fight against Carthage, and not to help Syracuse overthrow Dionysius. He hoped that the rioting citizens could calm down and work together to drive away Carthage's soldiers who had already surrounded the city. At the same time, he also made Dionysius promise that from now on, he would not retaliate against the citizens who participated in the riot, and that his rule would be more lenient in the future. With the full support of Sparta, Dionysius temporarily got through a difficult situation. After Carthage's people outside the city settled down, they began to destroy all the facilities outside Syracuse. Not only did they destroy farmland, villages, but they also blasphemed the god. Not only did they destroy the temple of Zeus on the Popaic Highlands, but they also robbed the temples of the goddesses Demeter and Persephone. This blasphemous behavior angered the people of Syracuse, and both sides had many small-scale land and sea battles outside the city and in the big port, with both sides winning and losing. The war continued until the arrival of summer, and as the temperature rose, the situation began to favor the people of Syracuse, because the number of mosquitoes in the swamp near the Asper River increased, and the Carthage soldiers who were bitten were tortured by the plague, and the number of deaths increased. At this time, under the pressure of internal and external troubles, Dionysius also stimulated his wisdom and came up with a clever attack plan. March in the dark, use the tactic of diversion to move the enemy, and attack the weak side of the enemy's fortress at the same time with the navy and the army. Because of the plague, Carthage's morale was low, and they could not fight back in the face of the attack of Syracuse. At the cost of the lives of thousands of mercenaries, Dionysius successively captured the two fortresses built by Carthage by the Aropus River, Palicna Fortress and Dascon Fortress built by the coast. At the same time, he defeated the Carthage navy, and Carthage suffered heavy casualties. Himilco's camp was surrounded in the middle, and the camp was in chaos. It was in danger of being wiped out. At this time, Dionysius ordered the attack to stop. That night, Carthage's camp and Dionysius's secret messengers frequently came and went. For the next 3 days, the two sides remained calm, and no battles broke out. On the fourth night, Himilco only led the remaining 33 oared warships out of the big port in a panic, abandoning most of the Carthage soldiers, allies, and mercenaries. In the end, they were all wiped out by Syracuse and its allies. After the great victory, Dionysius did not pursue Carthage's people relentlessly. He completely recovered Sicily and chased Carthage's people out of the island. Because the previous incident of Syracuse's people forcing him to abdicate made him deeply aware that only if Carthage's forces continued to exist in Sicily, his position as the overlord would be guaranteed. Therefore, not only did he release Himilco's remaining troops, but he also did not continue to sweep through Carthage's colonial towns in Sicily. Instead, he began to focus on the Psyche's forces in the inland areas of Sicily. This was because the Psyches had become Carthage's accomplices in this war, and caused a lot of trouble for Syracuse. This made him feel that it was not enough to unify the Greek city-states on the island. He had to expand Syracuse's influence in the Psyche's residential areas, and completely turn eastern Sicily into an iron plate. Syracuse's army began to conquer the Psyche's towns, such as Mogontina, Cephaloidion, Hina, and many others. It also forced more Psyche's forces to sign subordinate agreements with it. They also surrounded the only coastal city that Himilco had built for the Psyches, Tauromirion. However, they could not take it down immediately. In the second year, 396 BC, Syracuse's power had already expanded to the northeast of Sicily. On the ruins of Carthage's destruction, Dionysius rebuilt Messina. The new Messina was made up of the colonists from Syracuse's allies, Lochley and Medma. This was mainly to win over his allies in Great Greece. At the same time, there were also a few hundred Messenians who had just been driven out of their native areas by Sparta. These new residents were no longer related to the Lygium. Chapter 339. In order to maintain the friendship with Sparta, Dionysius had no choice but to move the Messenians out of Messina. He built the city of Tyndaris in an inconspicuous place not far from Messina to house the Messenians. The reconstruction of Messina and the construction of Tyndaris made Lygium feel uneasy on the other side of the strait. The people of Lygium felt that Dionysius was coveting their city-state. They even felt that joining the Southern Alliance was not very safe. This was because Syracuse had not only unified the Greek city-states in the east of Sicily, but it had also conquered the Psycheir people. It was too powerful. It was doubtful that the other city-states in the Southern Alliance would be willing to fight against the powerful Syracuse for the sake of Lygium. The only one who dared to challenge Syracuse was probably Dionia, the overlord of the Southern Alliance. Therefore, the people of Lygium held a citizens' assembly. The discussion went on for a few days without any result. At this time, a fleet of Syracuse sailed into the port of Messina. This fleet was originally to escort the Syracuse army to continue their expedition to the north coast of Sicily. However, it provoked the sensitive people of Lygium. The citizens' assembly quickly passed the motion, and an envoy was quickly sent to Thurii. In the Senate of Dionia, when the envoy of Lygium mentioned that Lygium is willing to join the alliance of Dionia, the senators, including the Devers, were quite shocked. In the alliance of Dionia, Laus, Castellan, Metapontum, Elia, Heraclea, and Galagusso were all small and medium-sized city-states in the Southern Alliance. Although Potentia was a large city-state in the alliance, it was forced to join the alliance of Dionia. It was not very obedient to Dionia. In the past 2 years, Dionia had been busy reorganizing and governing Brudi and Picassus. It had not had the time to care about Potentia, which was far away in the northern mountainous region of Dionia. Now, Ligyum had volunteered to join the alliance of Dionia. One had to know that Ligyum was not only a powerful city in Greece, but it was also the top city in terms of sea trade and wealth. With the addition of Ligyum, the merchant ships and fleets of Dionia could smoothly pass through the Strait of Messina. Not only would it be more convenient to trade with Iberia, Gaul, and the western Mediterranean. At the same time, it would also be more conducive for the navy to protect Dionia's cities on the west coast of Italy, Napatia, Picassus, and the allied city-states Laus and Elia, connecting the territorial waters of Dionia. The elders of Dionia were naturally overjoyed and prepared to accept Ligyum into their ranks. However, Ligyum's emissary had one condition. The Archon and Devers of Dionia had to marry a Ligyum woman, and this woman had already been chosen by the Ligyum. Her name was Agnes. Who was Agnes? She was known as the Rose of Ligyum, and was extremely beautiful at the age of 16. She even attracted a marriage proposal from the tyrant of Syracuse, Dionysius, but was firmly rejected by the vigilant Ligyum. The furious Syracuse emissary said, "Our all-powerful general will open his eyes and see who is more qualified than him to marry Agnes." Then, Dionysius turned around and proposed to marry the woman of Rockley. He decorated the passenger ship that welcomed Rockley's wife with jewels and dazzling gold. This became a hot topic in Greece at the time. In Ligyum, Agnes had never been able to marry because of the words left behind by the Syracuse emissary. As Syracuse continued to expand and become more powerful, not only the men of Ligyum, but the entire city-state did not want to anger Dionysius, thus making Ligyum the target of the tyrant of Syracuse's wrath. In the end, a few years passed like this. Agnes was already a single woman at the age of 21. Greek women usually married after the age of 14, which was the end of puberty, but no one dared to marry her. She had no choice but to become the priestess of the famous virgin goddess Artemis. Now faced with the threat of Syracuse, the realistic and sophisticated people of Ligyum believed that the Devers were the true rulers of Dionia. Thus, they wanted to use Agnes to bind the Devers to Ligyum and deal with Dionysius together. The Devers saw through the intentions of the Ligyum people and immediately refused. Who knew that a few days later, the Ligyum emissary would actually persuade most of the senators of the Senate, including Myrzus, Marigi, Cunigurata, Cornelis, and the others, to jointly visit the Devers, hoping that he would agree to Ligyum's request. They also refuted the Devers' claim that they had to abide by the law of monogamy in Dionia. This was because there was no such mandatory rule in Dionia's laws. It was just a custom. Even in Athens, where monogamy was once explicitly stipulated, during the Great Plague before the War of Peloponnesus, polygamy was encouraged due to the large decrease in population. At the same time, they also emphasized that Dionysius of Syracuse and the other tyrants of Sicily had multiple wives. Thus, the life consul of Dionia, the hegemon of southern Italy, could also do the same. They also refuted the Devers' worry that Dionia would be dragged into the war with Syracuse by Ligyum. Felicius, Antonius, and the others believed that although Syracuse seemed powerful, the people of Carthage would always be its greatest enemy. How would Dionysius dare to risk fighting on both sides and rashly offend the equally powerful Dionia? In fact, the news from Sicily seemed to prove this point. The army of Syracuse swept westward along the northern coast of Sicily and began to approach the city of Sorus. Finally, the Carthage Senate, which had been enraged by Dionysius's army besieging Tauromenion, finally made up its mind. It appointed Margo, the younger brother of Hermico, as its commander-in-chief. It recruited soldiers and prepared to lead the army to Sicily to resist the attack of Syracuse. For the senators in charge of political affairs in the Senate of Dionia, accepting Ligyum was not a great risk. On the contrary, it was a great benefit. For the senators in charge of military affairs, Ligwam had a relatively powerful naval fleet, which could make up for the shortcomings of Dionia. Under the persuasion of the crowd, the Devers were somewhat hesitant. At this time, his wife, Christoia, stood up and expressed her support for the Senate's wish for the Devers to marry another wife of Ligwam. She also persuaded the Devers to accept Agnes. Christoia, who was born in Miletus, Asia Minor, had been influenced by Persia's culture since childhood. She was not too resistant to polygamy. Back then, Cyrus the Younger had more than 10 favored concubines. Moreover, as a successful merchant, she knew the importance of Ligwam's allegiance to Dionia's trade. The Devers were finally persuaded to marry the 21-year-old Agnes of Ligwam into the official residence of the Archon of Dionia. Ligwam also successfully joined the Dionia alliance. This matter shocked the entire Greek Empire. When Dionysius received the news, he was leading his army to besiege Sorus. He had already ordered a retreat, but he gave a new order: blow the bugle horn to attack. In these 2 years, on the land of Asia Minor, the Greek allied army led by Dicrates created a lot of trouble for Persia. Thus, in 396 BC, King Artaxerxes of Persia, under the suggestion of his mother, appointed Conon of Athens, who was temporarily living in Persia, as the commander of the Persian navy. Conon was originally the commander of the Athens navy. In the Battle of the Ram River, he suffered a crushing defeat to Sparta's Lysander, which ultimately led to Athens' surrender to Sparta. Conon fled to Persia and never forgot to take revenge on Sparta. Thus, he often tried to curry favor with the Queen Mother of Persia, Palusatis. Now that he finally had military power in his hands, he immediately led 300 Persia warships and actively cooperated with the Persia's land forces. Soon, Sparta's army suffered heavy casualties and fell into a predicament. Thus, Persia proposed a truce and peace talks, but Sparta refused. At this time, Sparta, who was already the overlord of Greece, was unwilling to accept peace talks when they were in a passive state. Not only would the terms of the peace talks be very unfavorable to Sparta, but it would also damage the prestige of Sparta among the Greek city-states. Thus, the Council of Elders decided to send King Agesilaus to replace Dicrates and start a bigger war in Asia Minor. Agesilaus had always shown his amiable and humble side in front of the Sparta people. However, under the mask of obeying Sparta's traditions and laws, he hid an ambition that no one knew. He longed for great glory and worshipped ancient heroes. He hoped to use unprecedented victories to make the world forget his lame foot and only remember his achievements. So when he received the order from the Council of Elders, he already saw himself as this era's Agamemnon to conquer the new Troy, which was Persia. Thus, he led a part of his army to the city of Aulis, located in the Boeotia region. The most famous city-state in this region was the Thebes, to offer sacrifices to the temple of Artemis, just like Agamemnon, the king of kings, had done before he led all the Greek armies to cross the sea to attack Troy. However, during the solemn worship process, the Thebes appeared. They claimed that the Sparta's actions did not inform the Thebes and forcibly stopped the ceremony. This incident cast a shadow over the already tense relationship between Sparta and the Thebes. For the extremely proud Agesilaus, this was a great humiliation. From then on, he remembered the Thebes. In the end, Agesilaus led an army of 2,000 new Sparta citizens and a 30-man military council, including Lysander, and quietly crossed the sea to Asia Minor and settled in Ephesus. Chapter 340. As the Sparta hero who defeated Athens, Lysander had once set up a puppet regime loyal to Sparta in Athens' sea allies. Now that he had come to Asia Minor, the authorities of these city-states fought to visit him, follow him around, and make various requests to him, as if he was the real king and Agesilaus was just a follower. But soon, Lysander had a taste of Agesilaus' power. Any request he made to Agesilaus, even if it was reasonable, was rejected by the Sparta king. Agesilaus even secretly sent people out to spread the news that Lysander was just an ordinary member of Sparta's, 30-man military council, and had no power. As a result, Lysander's promises to these people were ultimately unable to be fulfilled, causing the authorities of these city-states to realize that the situation had changed, and they turned to please Agesilaus. Agesilaus' distance from Lysander made Lysander feel uneasy. He finally realized that he had been blind in the beginning. This new king was definitely not a mediocre person who could be manipulated by others. At that moment, Lysander was no longer the glorious Sparta hero from a few years ago. The failure of his plot to overthrow the Sparta system and the wariness of the other people in the Elder Council had caused him to be stripped of his real power. In the end, he had no choice but to take the initiative to propose to Agesilaus that he was willing to head to the Hellespont Strait and rope in the city-states that had previously been dependent on Persia. Agesilaus agreed to his request. After dealing with the ambitious Lysander, Agesilaus began to show his military talent. He was more flexible in using troops than Decyridas. He moved back and forth between the territories of the two Persia governors, Tisaphnes and Phanabatzos, causing the Persia army to be at a loss. In the Battle of Sardis in the spring of 395 BC, Tisaphnes's army suffered heavy losses. Due to this fiasco, the mother of Artaxerxes of Persia, Palasatis, finally seized the opportunity to have her son remove Tisaphnes from his position and finally execute him, thus avenging the death of her youngest son, Cyrus the Younger. When the news reached Agesilaus' army, the mercenaries who had experienced the great retreat of 10,000 cheered thunderously. Xenophon even wrote a letter to the Devers in Thurii to express his joy and admiration for Agesilaus, the king of Sparta. Agesilaus' military campaign in Asia Minor put a lot of pressure on Persia. The king of Persia had to mobilize troops from other regions to deal with Sparta's attack. As a result, other regions were left defenseless. In the farthest province of Egypt from Persia, the Egyptians who had been resisting Persia's rule finally seized this opportunity. Under the leadership of Acarus, they successfully drove out the Persia, achieved independence, and rebuilt the kingdom of Egypt. Acarus also became the new pharaoh. This was the 29th dynasty in ancient Egyptian history. In order to recapture Egypt, Persia sent messengers to Agesilaus many times in 395 BC to propose peace talks, but Agesilaus rejected Persia's proposal. Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, could see that Sparta had no intention of withdrawing from Asia Minor. On the contrary, Agesilaus' ultimate target was himself. So, the angry Artaxerxes, under the suggestion of his ministers, sent messengers to Greece and began to bribe the generals and counselors of the city-states who had a bad relationship with Sparta, such as Thebes, Corinth, and Argos. The only condition was that they must go to war with Sparta. The answers of these city-states were very similar. Even without the money, they were eager to go to war because Sparta was too overbearing. Not only did they not respect them, but they also repeatedly harmed the interests of their city-states. Under the urging of Persia's messengers, these city-states began to quietly discuss forming an alliance. Among them, the Thebes were the most enthusiastic about declaring war on Sparta. They began to provoke their own ally, Rhocles, into a conflict with Phocis, the ally of Sparta. When Phocis finally invaded Rhocles, the Thebes declared that Phocis had invaded their ally, and in order to protect their ally, they declared war on Phocis. Thus, the Thebes gathered an army to invade Phocis' territory. The weak Phocis had no choice but to ask for help from Sparta. Although Phocis was small, it was an important city-state in the region of Delphi, which was conducive to Sparta's involvement in the religious affairs of Delphi. Moreover, the Sparta still remembered the Thebes' contempt and destruction of their temple sacrifices before the expedition to Persia. Thus, they were very happy to find a reason to attack the Thebes, and immediately decided to punish the Thebes for their disrespect towards Sparta. Thus, the Sparta army divided into two groups to invade the Thebes. One group was led by another Sparta king, Pausanias, to the north, while the other group was led by Lysander, who had already returned to Sparta, to Phocis to organize a local coalition army to attack the Thebes from the south. Lysander completed his task quickly and excellently, and even instigated the Ochomenus in the region of Pyotia to rebel. Faced with the powerful threat of Sparta, the Thebes turned to the nearest powerful state, Athens, for help. After a series of hardships such as their defeat in the War of Peloponnesus, the dark rule of the 30 tyrants, and the restoration of the democrats, the people of Athens shed their former arrogance. At home, they used a moderate system to reconcile the differences between the democrats and the nobles. Externally, they treated their former allies as equals. Under this steady and pragmatic policy, after nearly a decade, the power of Athens quickly recovered. The powerful Athens wanted to break away from the control of Sparta and gain true freedom in military and commerce. Thus, after receiving the request for help from the Thebes, Athens held a citizens' assembly. At the assembly, the majority of the citizens voted in favor of an alliance with their former archenemy, the Thebes, and a war against Sparta. In the end, the democratic leader, Thrasybulus, who once led the resistance in a difficult battle and finally overthrew the rule of the 30 tyrants, and brought the rebirth of Athens, reported the decision of the people of Athens to the envoy of the Thebes, and said in a firm tone, "Although the port of Piraeus has no walls yet, we, the people of Athens, will bravely face the danger and fight side by side with you, the people of Thebes, against the cruel Sparta." The people of Thebes were moved. The two city-states, who had been enemies for decades, quickly signed an alliance, declaring that the Thebes and Athens would form an eternal alliance. At the same time, the troops led by Lysander and Pausanias approached the region of Pyotia from the south and north respectively. They agreed to meet near the city of Haliartus, an ally of the Thebes to the south. However, when Lysander arrived, Pausanias's army was still nowhere to be seen. Lysander tried to persuade the people of Haliartus to betray the Thebes. The people of Haliartus pretended to agree and secretly stalled for time. When the reinforcements of the Thebes arrived, they suddenly left the city and attacked Lysander's army from the front and back with the Thebes' army. As the founder of Sparta's hegemony, Lysander died unexpectedly in this sudden battle. However, in the following battle, the people of Thebes failed to completely defeat the remnants of the army that had lost its leader. Instead, they suffered heavy losses. The next day, Pausanias arrived with his army. When the people of Thebes saw that the people of Sparta had the advantage in numbers and the orderly formation of the army, their morale immediately dropped. However, Pausanias did not immediately lead his army to attack. Instead, he set up camp nearby. On the third day, the reinforcements from Athens also arrived. The people of Thebes immediately gained confidence. They formed a formation with the people of Athens, ready to fight the people of Sparta. However, Pausanias did not immediately lead his army to close in on this coalition army, nor did he accept the enemy's challenge. Instead, he summoned his team officers to discuss, should we start the war immediately or sign a truce? This would make it easier for them to retrieve the bodies of Lysander and the other fallen soldiers. In the end, the people of Sparta decided to call a truce. After the two sides negotiated, the army of Sparta withdrew from Pyotia with the bodies of their comrades. The ordinary people of Sparta were grieved when they saw Lysander's body. They recalled the great contributions that Lysander had made to Sparta and turned their grief into anger. They accused the king of Sparta, Pausanias, of deliberately delaying the meeting time, causing Lysander's death, and his crime of retreating without fighting. The elders of the Council of Elders did not fully defend the king of Sparta because Lysander's death and Sparta's retreat had a huge impact. It directly led to the conclusion of the anti-Sparta alliance by four important Greek city-states: Thebes, Athens, Corinth, and Argos. Thus, the king of Sparta, Pausanias, was convicted and exiled. The people of Sparta realized that this anti-Sparta alliance was a great threat to Sparta's hegemony. They quickly gathered their troops in an attempt to destroy this alliance. The anti-Sparta alliance also quickly gathered their troops in the Isthmus of Corinth, hoping to resist Sparta's attack, then counterattack into Sparta's territory and completely burn down the hornet's nest. Thus, the two sides began a long battle in the Isthmus of Corinth in the same year. There was also a war in Sicily. The armies of Syracuse and Carthage had been fighting on the northern coast of Sicily for more than half a year. When the time came to 494 BC, the important countries and city-states of the Mediterranean were in a quagmire of war, but Greece had already enjoyed more than 3 years of peace. Early in the morning, Lycasus came to the clinic and started cleaning and arranging things. As a physician's apprentice, he was responsible for the preparation work every day. He firmly believed that only hard work could win his teacher's trust and learn real medical skills. Today, he was in a particularly good mood because he was going to accompany his teacher on a long journey. When Nicostratus, the physician, slowly came to the clinic, Lycasus had already packed the package. Nicostratus, who never liked to worry about trivial matters, only asked, "Did you bring everything?" Chapter 341. Lycasus closed the door and hung a wooden sign that said, "Out closed." "Hey, Nicostratus, you're going out?" The owner of the butcher shop across the street waved his knife and shouted. Nicostratus snorted and ignored the butcher. He had always thought that it was because of the butcher's loud peddling across the street every day that the rich were not willing to go to his clinic. He had thought of moving the clinic several times, but the housing prices in Ciudad Crotone were not low. The location of the house he could afford was not as good. Therefore, he had always been rude to this rude neighbor. "How long are you going to be out?" The owner of the butcher shop was used to the doctor's attitude. Seeing that he did not answer, he continued to ask loudly. The well-behaved Lycasus saw that his teacher's face was gradually becoming gloomy and quickly answered for him, "I'll be out for about 20 days, Uncle Marcus." "That's so long." The owner of the butcher shop exclaimed, "We're sick. What if you're not here?" Nicostratus's face twitched a few times. He could not help but shout back, "Then bear with it and don't get sick until I come back. It's not up to me to decide whether I get sick or not. It's all a prank by the gods," the owner of the butcher shop complained. Nicostratus did not want to talk to her any more and strode forward. "Dr. Nicostratus, where are you going after being out for so long?" another person asked. This time, Nicostratus stopped in his tracks because the person who asked was a merchant from the bakery. He was a rare and important customer, and every time he came to see him, he would pay a lot of money. "To Turii," he answered seriously. "Turii? You're invited to treat your illness, right?" The merchant saw Lycasus carrying a medical box and said proudly, "The medical skills of our Crotone are famous throughout Greece. Dionia only has a larger territory and can fight wars. In other aspects, it is far inferior to Crotone, which has a long history." His words resonated with the owner of the butcher shop. "You're absolutely right. Those people in the north are actually refugees. How can they have any culture or city-state traditions?" Dionia's influence in Great Greece was growing year by year, causing the ordinary people of Crotone, who were once strong, to feel disappointed. Out of a sour grapes mentality, they always liked to compare some of the advantages of their city-state with Dionia, and then make sarcastic remarks about the people of Dionia in order to obtain some kind of psychological satisfaction. Nick said a few perfunctory words to Tratus and quickly walked out of his neighborhood. "Ignorant!" At this time, he softly spat out. The rise of Crotone medicine originated from Democritus 100 years ago. When he was young, this Crotone man was determined to become the best doctor in the Mediterranean. He traveled around the various states to learn medicine, and after he finished his studies, he practiced medicine in Athens. Because of his good medical skills, he earned a lot of money. Later, he went to the island of Samos to treat his tyrant. In the end, Persia attacked Asia Minor and Samos fell. He became a prisoner and was escorted to Susa. Coincidentally, the King of Kings, Darius, fell ill and he was cured. Only then did he escape from prison and serve the royal family, but he was restricted from returning to Greece. After living in Persia for 5 or 6 years, he missed his distant hometown very much. One day, Darius's queen, the daughter of Cyrus, the founding king of Persia, Atossa, had a lump on her thigh. No one could treat it and she suffered greatly. Atossa heard that Democritus was a skilled doctor, and with the thought of giving it a try, she invited the Greek to the inner court to treat her, and promised that if he cured her, the queen would agree to any of his requests. As a result, Democritus helped Queen Atossa recover. At his request, Atossa suggested to Darius that Democritus could take Persia's spies around Greece to gather intelligence in preparation for the future conquest of Greece. Darius agreed, and Democritus also vowed to return to Susa. As a result, after leaving Persia, he found an opportunity to escape Persia's surveillance, and fled back to Crotone. At that time, although Persia was strong, it had not yet declared war on Greece, and it could not affect the western Mediterranean thousands of miles away, so it could only leave it be. Democritus opened a clinic in his hometown, widely accepting apprentices, and selflessly imparted his years of experience as a doctor, as well as his combined medical skills in Greece and Persia, which greatly improved the medical skills of Ciudad Crotone, and made Crotone's doctors second to none in Greece for a century. However, in recent years, the medical skills of Dionia, like the strength of its alliance, improved rapidly. It was said that some of the difficult and complicated diseases that Crotone's doctors could not solve were miraculously cured or improved by Dionia's doctors. Some Greeks who were not part of the Dionia alliance and were terminally ill tried to go to Dionia's hospitals for treatment, and most of them happily returned to their homes. Just like that, the reputation of the excellent medical skills of Dionia, taught by Pluto, gradually spread. As far as Nicostratos knew, many wealthy citizens of Crotone often went to Dionia's center, Thurii, for treatment. The doctors of Dionia had even set up an organization called the Southern Italian Medical Forum, which was held every spring, inviting doctors from the Dionia Alliance and its allies to gather in Thurii to discuss new medical discoveries and exchange medical skills. Last year was the first year, and the conservative Nicostratos did not attend. However, when he chatted with his colleagues who returned, they said a few words about the novel medical theories and methods they learned from Dionia. After being surprised, Nicostratos began to ponder. Therefore, at the beginning of this year, when Thurii Hospital sent out invitations to its allies, he could not wait to set off. Originally, it would only take half a day to reach Thurii by boat from the port, but unfortunately, Nicostratos suffered from seasickness, so he could only travel by land. When they arrived at the north gate, another doctor, Stesippus, was already waiting there. The three of them left Ciudad Crotone, stepped on the soft dirt road, and headed north. The three of them arrived at the pontoon bridge on the Neto River. During the Second War of Crotone, the pontoon bridge was burned down to prevent the Dionia from breaking into Ciudad Crotone. When it was rebuilt, for some reason, the bridge was not only narrow, but also less stable than before. Stesippus could not help but complain on the way. The bridge on the Neto River in Thurii is a real wooden bridge. Not only is it wide and flat, but boats can also pass under it. Compared to them, our pontoon bridge looks more like it was built by the natives. Nicostratos did not say anything. He remembered that last year, Crotone had held a citizens' meeting to discuss whether to invite the Dionia to help them build a wooden bridge on the Neto River. Most of the proud citizens of Crotone were against it, and the proposal was not passed. Nicostratos himself was one of them. Like the majority, he thought that it was fine as long as the roads and bridges could be used. The money from the national treasury should be used to repair public facilities such as theaters, arenas, and temples. They could even provide extra benefits for citizens on special occasions. Due to the blessings of the gods, the weather in Greece had been good for the past few years, and the crops had been harvested. Coincidentally, there had been frequent wars in the past 2 years, and the price of grain had risen. After the citizens had saved enough for themselves, they sold grain on the market and made a small profit. Therefore, spring came early this year, and the citizens brought their slaves to plant wheat seedlings in the fields early. Walking on the Croton plains, one could see lush green wheat fields as far as the eye could see. The slaves worked hard in the fields. There was more rain in spring, and the roads became muddy. In order to avoid tripping, Nicostratos and his group walked slowly. They only walked out of Crotone's territory in the afternoon. When they trudged through the slippery mud, and their feet began to ache, they saw a flat and wide road in front of them. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Teacher Staesopus, Lycasus, who had never traveled far in his life, shouted excitedly, "Is this the Cremissa Asprostum Avenue that Dionia built?" "That's right." Staesopus glanced at Nicostratos. "Old friend, what do you think of this road?" Nicostratos snorted and did not say anything. He walked straight forward until he came to an empty stone block in the middle of the pedestrians who were resting on the sidewalk. He had a problem with his waist to begin with, and he felt like his waist was about to break after the long walk. Lycasus was young and full of energy. Seeing the bustling traffic on the main road, he even crossed the drainage ditch and tried to walk on the main road. In the end, he was almost hit by a pack cart and was scolded by the coachman. Embarrassed, he retreated back to the sidewalk. Nicostratos only quietened down after scolding him. But after a while, he pulled Staesopus and asked, "What's that cart for?" Looking in the direction he was pointing, a 2-horse pack cart with a canopy was heading north at a relatively fast speed. The sides of the tarpaulin were painted with the Dionia's symbol, double fork and 3-headed dog. The cars on the avenue deliberately moved to the side. "That's a mail cart." "A mail cart?" "That's what the people of Dionia call it. It's responsible for delivering letters and parcels between the two places. It's said that Dionia has a department dedicated to this," Staesopus said. "That's a good idea. It's convenient for the people of the city," Nicostratos interrupted. "If only Crotone had a mail cart. At least we wouldn't have to run back and forth to deliver medicine to the patient." "It's a waste of time," Lycasus said enviously. Chapter 342. We don't have any other cities in Crotone. It's a waste to use the treasury's money to pay for the mail. Asprostum still belonged to us, we could consider it. But if that's the case, our roads and bridges would have to be built like this. Staesopus stomped his foot. Indeed, the uneven dirt roads in Crotone could easily cause a carriage to fall apart. Asprostum. It was a pain in the hearts of the people of Crotone. Nicostratus snorted and cursed. "It's all the council's fault. You know, a few years ago this was the Croton Plains. It was fertile land. Now it belongs to the people of Dionia. We should get going or we won't be able to make it to Cremissa tonight." Staesopus changed the topic and reminded the two. "How far are we from Cremissa?" Nicostratus asked, rubbing his thigh. He was a little tired since he didn't come out often. Staesopus stood up and looked ahead. He pointed ahead and said, "Lycasus, go take a look at that stone tablet. How far is it to Cremissa?" "Is the distance carved on the tablet?" Lycasus walked over, puzzled. After a while, he pointed at the tablet and shouted, 20 miles from Cremissa. "Is this it?" "Yes." "And there's a small house carved on the next line. It's written 5 miles. What does that mean?" "It means there's a station 5 miles ahead. It can provide temporary rest, food, and even accommodation," a passerby beside Lycasus replied. "Oh, thank you." Lycasus thanked him politely. "Your doctors?" the man asked with a smile when he saw the medical box he was carrying. "Yes, I'm going to Turii with my teacher to participate in a medical forum. The doctors of Dionysia have superb medical skills, and they are blessed by Hades. They can save the dying. You have found the right place to learn." The man had a look of understanding. "What a coincidence. I'm going to Turii too. The man's words made Nickstratus uncomfortable. He stood up and said, "Let's go. We still have to hurry." They walked on the sidewalk. Beyond the sidewalk were fields of wheat that were being plowed. It was no different from what he had seen before. The difference was that the aqueducts were crisscrossed, wider and deeper, but the slaves worked with greater zeal, and even sang in the midst of their labors, which their masters did not restrain, and some even sang in reply. Compared to the dullness of the Crotone slaves, the Dionia slaves were more like normal people, and this was not an isolated phenomenon. Almost all the Dionia slaves that Lycasus had seen were in such a state. Lycasus didn't quite understand. He was born in a peasant family, so he knew the life of a farmer very well. Crotone farmers usually had 1 or 2 slaves, as they couldn't afford any more. Since they needed labor to do farm work, they were very dependent on their slaves. Unlike the various workshop owners in the city who desperately squeezed them, the slaves were treated as part of the family. When Lycasus was a child, he had been carefully taken care of by his family's slaves. He had always thought that the simple and honest old man Thrace was more like a father than his own father. The Crotone farmers treated their slaves well enough. Could it be that the Dionia people treated their slaves better? Lycasus felt that it was somewhat impossible. He wanted to ask Statius, but when he turned his head, he saw that the two of them were discussing medical matters, so he had to give up for the time being. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the man who had spoken before walking not far behind them. His heart skipped a beat, and he slowed down his pace. "My name is Lycasus, from Crotone. Thank you for your reminder. My name is Caldius, a Silesian." The man smiled warmly. "I have been to Turis many times, so I know more about Dionia. If there is anything you don't understand about this city-state alliance, feel free to ask me." The man seemed to have read his mind. Lycasus scratched his head in embarrassment and asked, "I don't understand why these slaves are so happy." Caldius looked in the direction that Lycasus was pointing and saw the slaves singing in the wheat field. He thought for a moment and said, "That's because they have hope." "Hope?" Caldius' expression became solemn, and his voice was slow and long. "The great Pluto once said, 'Everyone's fate is different. Some are born rich, some poor, some unfortunate to become slaves, and some lucky to become nobles. But as long as you always have kindness in your heart and don't give up, when your life ends and you are judged by Hades, in the face of the golden scales of justice and selflessness, status and wealth in life are only illusory. What truly decides each person's soul is to go to the beautiful Elysee or the terrible hell. This is what you do in your life. The good go to the Elysee, and the evil go to hell. The hard work can enjoy music and food, and the easy work and hate work will forever be forced to do hard labor." Lycasus was stunned. You mean these slaves work so enthusiastically for the sake of entering the Elysee in the future?" "It's not entirely because of this," Caldius said softly. "The consul Devers of Dionia, who have the blood of the Hades, were inspired by the Father and passed a bill in the Senate. Every year on the Hades celebration, the slaves of the city-state who have performed well will be granted freedom. And the Devers will also grant freedom to their slaves who have performed well on this day. Because the Devers are loved and respected by the people of Dionia, they are influenced by the consul. If they have the power to spare, they will also consider granting freedom to the private slaves who have contributed to their family. I remember that last year, a Nubian slave was sent by his master to the port market to buy goods. He rescued 2 children from drowning in the Kekrati River. Not only was the father of the children willing to pay for his freedom, but the people of the city unanimously asked for his freedom. So you see, with such an atmosphere in Dionia, how can these slaves not do their best to perform? Lycasus nodded. Although the Crotone also granted freedom to their slaves, they did not use a bill like Dionia to enact it. Moreover, the number of times the slaves were released was so high and so many. In fact, there was another reason that Chaldeas did not understand. Although the age composition of the citizens and prospective citizens of Dionia was mainly young and middle-aged, due to the large number of immigrants in Dionia, the number of times the citizens had to participate in military training was more than 10 times that of the Crotone. They also had to undertake some garrison duties. They did not have more energy and time to take care of their own land. They relied more on the slaves. Therefore, not only did they see the slaves as part of their family, but they also had more autonomy in their work, which was more conducive to the slaves' enthusiasm. That's why the slaves of Siloton have been escaping to Kenopatisha from time to time in the past 2 years, Chaldeas added. There was also a large-scale slave escape in Crotone. Lycasus remembered, but it was not to Kenopatisha, but to Asprustum, which is not far from Crotone. At that time, we even held a citizens' meeting and sent people to protest to Asprustum, asking for the return of the escaped slaves. They quickly escorted the slaves back. If the Silatorians and Crotone do not make any changes on the slave issue, there will be more such incidents in the future. Chaldeas sighed. As a Silatorian, he did not seem to be worried about this. Instead, he was happy to see it happen. Of course, the young Lycasus did not think too much about it. He asked another question. "Oh right, you just said, those words that Pluto Hades said, why haven't I heard of them before? There are too many things about the gods that you have not heard of." Chaldea's eyes lit up. "You should know that when Zeus and his siblings worked together to overthrow their father, Cronus, and divided the power of their father, Hades, as the eldest brother, could have chosen the sky or the sea as his divine realm. But he chose the dark and damp hell, and thus lived underground for a long time. He created a fair and selfless abode for the weak human souls, and ensured the stability of the world above. Isn't he great? Is that so?" Lycasus said suspiciously. "Everyone knows that Hades was forced to choose hell. Have you ever thought about who passed down the truth that you know? Without the permission of Zeus, the master of the gods, how could such a secret be known to us ordinary humans? Zeus ruled over the Olympian gods, and of course he would use the contents of the rumors to his advantage. Pluto Hades was introverted, and his appearance was a little gloomy. The Greeks did not like him, so they all believed the rumors." Chaldeas said solemnly, "But in fact, among the gods, Hades was the most loyal to his duty and kept to his place. Zeus, wanton and willful; Poseidon, violent and ruthless; Ares, crazy and bloodthirsty; Hermes, mischievous and playful; Hephaestos, drunken and promiscuous; Apollo, proud and sinister. Only Hades, have you ever heard of anything bad happening to him?" After listening to Chaldea's words, Lycasus felt a little dazed. He covered his forehead and said after a long time, He took Demeter's daughter, Parsphone, as his wife." Chaldeas had a look of, "I knew you would say this," on his face. He explained seriously, "No goddess was willing to go there because of the harsh underground environment. Hades had no choice but to take a wife for himself by force." Note: the description of the stone tablets in this chapter is not from the modern era. In the early days of the Roman Empire, there were humanized designs for the stone tablets, very similar to the signs of today. Roman merchants also sold a kind of iron cup to travelers, engraved with detailed road maps of each province to facilitate travel. Chapter 343. But Hades doesn't just rob randomly. Persephone has the power of her mother, Demeter, and can help Hades control the underground resources. Moreover, Persephone is beautiful and kind, and can pacify the restless souls in hell. Facts have also proven that Hades and his wife Persephone have always respected and loved each other, far better than Zeus and Hera, or Poseidon and his queen. They rule hell fairly and strictly, upholding the good and punishing the evil. The people of the world are afraid of the punishment after death, so they don't indulge too much in life, and our city-state society is stable. Therefore, Hades is the god who has helped us the most. Caldus said sincerely. Caldus' words completely reversed Lycasus' understanding of the god. He wanted to refute, but he felt that Caldus' words made some sense. After a while, he murmured, "Are you the priest of Hades?" "I wish I was, but I'm not," Caldus said regretfully. "I'm a merchant. A year ago, when I went to Thurii to do business, I fell seriously ill and almost lost consciousness. My despicable slave even stole my purse. I thought I would quietly go to Hades in a foreign land." Caldus was immersed in the memories of the past. "But when I woke up, I found myself on a warm bed in the side hall of the Temple of Hades. The saintess in white robes served me with food and medicine, and the kind priest came to visit and comfort me from time to time. I quickly recovered. Not only did the priest of Hades not ask for money from me, but he even gave me money to go home. The great Hades saved my life." Caldus sobbed, and his eyes were a little wet. "Later, I learned that the Temple of Hades didn't just treat me like this. They treated every Greek in danger with the same kindness. Tell me, is there any other temple that treats its people as well as the Temple of Hades?" No. After listening to Caldus, Lycasus couldn't help but yearn for the Temple of Hades in Thurii. "That's why I've decided to go to Turin and serve Hades," Caldus said with determination. "In the future, I will return to the west courtyard and build a temple for Hades." At dusk, Nicestratus and his entourage arrived at the southern bank of the Umbria River. They crossed the wooden bridge over the river and entered the city of Cremissa. "I've asked all the hotels here, and they're all full. How are things on your side?" Nicestratus knew that something was wrong when he saw Statipus walking over with a dejected look on his face, but he still held onto a glimmer of hope. Statipus shook his head. "It's the same for the inns in the northern part of the city. I heard that it's because the marriage festival of Dionia is coming. Many engaged men and women in the city of Aspustum have to rush to the Temple of Hera in Thurii to attend the wedding ceremony, so the hotel rooms are fully booked." The sky was about to turn dark. The two of them were anxious, but there was nothing they could do. Were they going to sleep on the streets tonight? Thinking of this, Nicestratus subconsciously hugged his frail body tightly. "I have an idea." At this moment, a voice came from behind him. Seeing that the person who spoke was the Solidian he didn't like, Nicestratus couldn't care less about being reserved. "What is it?" "Come with me." Caldus smiled mysteriously and brought them to a place. "This is a temple?" Nicestratus looked at the building in front of him in confusion. Its shape was similar to the temples Nicestratus had seen before, but it was also different. There were no walls. "This is the Temple of Hades." Statipus had stayed in Thurii after all. "What are we doing here?" Nicestratus suddenly felt nervous. The eerie and terrifying Hades was the master of the night. "Lodging," Caldus said and walked straight in. Lycasus followed closely behind, excited and curious. After understanding the situation, the priest of the temple readily agreed to let them rest in the temple. However, the empty rooms in the side hall were already full, so the priest brought them to the main hall. Nicestratus and the others were still a little afraid. Would they disturb Hades? The priest said with a smile, "Hades is kind and willing to help the people in need, as long as they don't pollute the environment in the temple." There were actually people resting on the floor in the main hall. Nicestratus and the others were relieved. The priest even asked the believers to provide them with blankets and hot water. Even Nicestratus, who had never come into contact with the Temple of Hades before, praised Hades for his kindness. That night they slept peacefully. Of course, the main hall they slept in was on the side of Elysium. No one dared to sleep in the hall on the other side of Hades. The next morning, after thanking the priest, the group left the Temple of Hades. As Nicestratus' back was still aching, Statipus suggested taking a carriage, so the group went to the carriage shop. Unexpectedly, the business here was also very good. There were no empty carriages until a carriage from Aspustum alighted 4 people. Only then were they able to pay and board the carriage. There was a young man and a woman in the carriage. The woman held the man's arm intimately and did not let go of the stranger's. This irritated the conservative Nixtratus, and he cursed inwardly. The people of Dionia are barbaric and not familiar with traditional Greek etiquette. Chaldus, on the other hand, often traveled in Dionia and was used to the sight of Dionia women in public, so he took the initiative to talk to them. After exchanging pleasantries, they found out that the man was called Ephialtes, and he became an official citizen of Dionia last year. He lived in Asplustum, while the woman was born and raised in Asplustum. When Dionia signed the peace treaty with Crotone, her family was one of the few who chose to stay, and they seemed to be doing quite well. This made the people of Crotone in the car feel a little uncomfortable. The carriage had only traveled a short distance when it stopped. Loud noises could be heard coming from outside the carriage. Statopus lifted the tarpaulin at the front of the carriage and asked the driver what was going on. "There's a square in front of us. Those damn rich and nobles have gathered there and are causing trouble. They've blocked the road," the driver said angrily. "We have no choice but to take a detour." After Statopus sat down and explained the situation, Nixtratus became interested. "Why are the people of Cremissa causing trouble?" "I know a little," Chaldus said after some thought. Cardius thought for a moment and said, "Since last autumn, a small number of people in the city of Crimea have begun to protest outside the city hall near the square, asking to reconvene the General Assembly and give the citizens the right to participate in politics. I didn't expect that there would be so many people protesting outside the square this year. The citizens of Dionia should have done that a long time ago. Which city in Greece doesn't hold a citizens' meeting? Only Dionia is an exception," Nixtratus said, venting his anger. "Syracuse doesn't have one either," Lycasus interrupted. "Shut up." Nixtratus glared at him, then loudly expressed his opinion. "A city without a citizens' meeting means that the people have no right to participate in politics. That's a dictatorship. A dictatorship can't last long. Of course, the citizens have to rise up and even overthrow it." Statopus pulled him to stop him from continuing. After all, they were only here to participate in the forum and exchange medical knowledge. It was not appropriate for them to spout nonsense and get involved in the internal disputes of Dionia. Ephiart's face was already red from holding back his anger. He retorted loudly, "Only the stupid people of Cremissa would do such a stupid thing. No one is causing trouble in Asprustum, no one is causing trouble in Amendolara, no one is causing trouble in Turiae, not even in the Grimentum. It's because of the rule of the Lord Devers that we can turn from refugees into citizens. That's why we can own land and enjoy peace. The priest of Hades is right. We have to be grateful. It's the same for Crotone. I heard that the war in Greece has been going on for a year. The people's lives are very difficult. Why has Greece been able to enjoy such a long period of peace? It's all because of our great commander, the divine Devers of Hades." Ephiart's words were spoken from the bottom of his heart. Although Nixtratus was harsh with his words, he was only a doctor, not a public speaker. He was not good at arguing with others until his face turned red. Seeing the young man's aggressive attitude, he cowered and muttered in a low voice, "Another Dionysius." At this point, the atmosphere in the carriage became silent. The carriage went around the square, exited through the south gate, and returned to the main road. The public carriage that Nixtratus and the others were riding in was a four-wheeled carriage with 2 horses. It could seat up to 6 people. The carriage was covered with a leather hood, and there were small windows on both sides, so there was plenty of light. The wooden seats were padded with relatively soft cloth and fur, which could slightly reduce the vibration transmitted from the friction between the wheels and the ground. Even though the roads of Dionia were far better than those of other Greek city-states, it was still inevitable that the carriage would jolt. The most troublesome thing to the passengers was the noise. To prevent the wooden wheels from cracking after a long period of use, they were fastened with iron rings on the outside. When the wheels turned, the iron rings would come into contact with the stones on the road, and the noise would be quite loud. Chapter 344. However, these carriages could not be driven and carried at will. There was a civilian organization, the Carriage Guild, which specialized in managing the public carriages in the Dionia Alliance. Only those whose driving skills and carriage equipment passed the examination could be qualified to operate the carriages. Otherwise, if they were found to be carrying passengers without permission, the patrols would come looking for them. Moreover, Dionia had also promulgated a special law on the situation of vehicles driving on the main road. It was said to have been proposed by the Devers. All vehicles on the main road must drive on the right. In this way, the traffic on the main road would not interfere with each other. Not only was the probability of accidents on the main road reduced, but the speed of the carriages was also naturally increased. Of course, Nix and Tratus did not pay attention to the details behind the carriages. They enjoyed the speed of the carriages. After an hour, the carriages entered the swamp area of the Crocoli River. No, it had now been renamed as the Crocoli River Plain. After more than 2 years of hard work, the people of Dionia had successfully transformed the area. They built dams on the flat riverbanks of the Crocoli River, dug ditches, drained and filled in soil, and dried and burned the land. The swamp, which was originally wet and filthy with snakes and insects, had been developed into fertile, high-yield arable land. Even the senators of the Senate were envious. The Devers stood their ground and fulfilled their original promise, distributing part of the land to the freedmen who had participated in this long project. Because of this merit, almost all of them had successfully become probationary citizens of Dionia. Someone in the Senate had once proposed to build a small city on this land. This idea was strongly opposed by the governor of Cremissa at the time, Scambras. His reason was that Cremissa had spent manpower and material resources to support the transformation of the swamp, and the construction of the Cremissa-Castellan Avenue also gave Cremissa the ability to manage this new small plain. Under his insistence, the Crocoli River Plain was placed under the jurisdiction of Cremissa. This made the originally small city of Cremissa suddenly jump in strength to the forefront of the cities of the Alliance of Dionia. This also caused some natives of Cremissa to feel that their status had risen, and they wanted a share of the land of the Crocoli River Plain. Of course, the Senate would not allow them to act rashly. This was also one of the reasons for the disputes among the people of Cremissa. There were also large tracts of farmland here, but unlike the Crocoli River Plain, the newly developed land was still overgrown with weeds. Under the blessing of the goddess of spring, Persephone, the fields were full of colorful wildflowers, making the land even more colorful. In the distance, there was a village vaguely visible, and smoke could be seen from the chimneys. The sounds of children playing, parents scolding, chickens crowing and dogs barking could be heard from time to time. It was a scene full of vitality. Lycasus, who had been watching the outside world through the window of the caravan, suddenly focused his eyes on a few shepherds who were driving a large herd of cattle to drink water by the river. Their attire was different from the Greeks, but it was so familiar to Lycasus. "Those are the Brudi!" Lycasus cried out with a stab of pain in the depths of his memory. When he was a child, he had seen the Brudi people burning and looting on the Crocoli River Plain, so the memory was still fresh in his mind. Nixtratus also looked out of the window in shock. "There's nothing strange about it. The Brudi people don't just live in the mountains in the west. They also live in other places within the Dionia Alliance. Even in Aspustum, there are Brudi people who came down from the upper valley of the Neto River. Here, the Crocoli River Plain, is the place with the most Brudi people other than the Brudi Mountains. It is said that there are several tribes here," Ephiart said proudly. Lycasus stared blankly at the few Brudi shepherds who were talking freely by the river. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. To the young people of Crotone, the Brudi people were nightmares, that their parents used to frighten them to make them obedient when they were young. Now, they were citizens that had been conquered by the Dionia Alliance. I heard that there have been battles in the Brity region for the past few years, Nix said casually. There are no battles. It's just some small conflicts between the various Brity tribes overland. The governor of Cosenza easily solved it for them, Effiart explained. Nix laughed coldly, and the carriage returned to its usual silence. In this narrow space, the people of Crotone and the people of Dionia did not seem to get along easily. The carriage entered the city of Castellan before noon. The driver needed to rest the tired horses for a while to recover their strength. At the same time, they had to be fed with pasture and water, so the passengers had an hour to rest. Nix, on the other hand, was discussing with Statopus whether they should hire another carriage to send them to Turii. He could not stand the strange sense of pride that came from the Dionia citizen, Effiart, who was also in the carriage. Caldus watched as the 3 Crotone people rushed into the carriage. He shook his head helplessly and turned around to walk to Kristoya's restaurant not far away. Fortunately, there were still empty seats in the restaurant. As soon as he sat down, he saw Effiart and his fiancée enter the restaurant. He greeted the two of them and began to order. 2 years ago, the blacksmiths of Turii invented the frying pan, after countless experiments under the guidance of the Devers. Kristoya's restaurant quickly introduced a series of fried food made with olive oil, and it quickly became popular throughout the Dionia Alliance. Caldus ordered a fried codfish and 2 rolls of honey. Not long after, the golden fried codfish and fragrant bread were served on the table. Already hungry, he couldn't wait to grab the warm bread and take a big bite. The crispy and soft bread mixed with the sweet fragrance of honey stimulated his taste buds and made him even more hungry. He quickly picked up the knife, cut a piece of fish, forked it, and put it in his mouth. Caldus quickly finished his lunch and stroked his bulging belly with satisfaction. He then wiped the cutlery clean, arranged it properly, and bowed solemnly. It was said that this set of cutlery was invented by the consul Devers of Dionia, inspired by Hades. Caldus had no doubt about it. Wasn't that little fork with only 2 teeth Hades' double fork? The waiter removed the plate, and Caldus ordered another glass of wine. He sipped the tea while listening to the other diners chatting. As a person who had traveled to the Dionia Alliance many times, Caldus could tell that most of the diners in this restaurant were locals of Castellan. Although the Greek pronunciation of each Greek city-state was more or less different, the pronunciation of the Dionia people was undoubtedly the most unique. Since they treated the Lucarians, the Briti, and the Thracians equally into the alliance and became citizens of Dionia, their respective cultures had constantly collided and merged. Even the accent of their speech had changed a lot. From time to time, a few unfamiliar words from the Lucarian or Briti language would pop out. This was the basis for the people of Crotone and Tarentum to regard the people of Dionia as barbaric. Caldus did not have such discrimination. Most of the things these people of Castellan talked about had nothing to do with the city they lived in, Castellan. Instead, it was about their neighbor, Turin. Something about how lively the upcoming wedding festival was. How beautiful was Agnes, the second wife of the consul Devers of Dionia. How did the Devers satisfy the needs of their 2 beautiful wives? The Dionia Medical Forum was about to be held in Turin. Which doctors of Castellan were going to participate? Wait a minute. Some people talked mysteriously. It was said that Dionia was going to start building its first stone bridge. Some people talked excitedly. The newly completed 3rd arena in Turin was going to be dedicated to football matches. Some people bragged. Last autumn, I went to Cosenza Plateau and saw how spectacular the horse racing celebration was. Some people would retort. Lucaria's sheep fighting competition was more exciting, but more people would say in unison, what was more interesting and exciting was undoubtedly the southern Italian rugby and Dionia football matches. When the diners talked about their city-states, there were more complaints. Some people even declared, It would be better to let Castellan become a part of the Dionia Alliance, instead of being independent of the Dionia Alliance as it was now. Although it would be freer, it would not be able to get more benefits from the Dionia Alliance. The citizens of Castellan also wanted more land. Not only did no one refute his outrageous words, but it was also approved by a few diners. The influence of Dionia in Greece was getting bigger and bigger, Caldus thought with a sigh. He estimated the time, left the restaurant, and walked to the carriage house. Next to the carriage he was in, he saw the 3 dejected people of Crotone. It turned out that the carriages in the carriage house had all been hired. Many of Castellan's fiancés and citizens wanted to go to Turin to participate in the wedding festival of the Shrine of Hera. So, the 6 of them were still on the same road, speechless along the way. After 3 hours of bumpy ride, the carriage finally stopped. "We've arrived," the coachman shouted. Lucasus looked out and saw a crowded crowd, towering sentry towers, and a long wooden bridge. We shouldn't have arrived at Turin yet, right?" Lucasus said doubtfully. Chapter 345. Then, the other 4 got out of the car and moved forward. People coming from the south had to cross the Crati River and enter Turin. There were 2 ways. The first was to enter the southern part of the city and take a boat from the dock to the main port of the Turin city. This was mainly for citizens of Dionia and visiting envoys from other cities. The second way was to cross the wooden bridge to the west of the southern part of the city, reach the delta where the 2 rivers converged, then cross the wooden bridge to the north bank of the Crati River, and finally enter the main city. After passing through the sentry post, the trio stepped onto the wooden bridge. Unlike his teacher, Lycasus stomped his feet curiously and patted the railing. From time to time, he craned his neck to look at the boats passing under the bridge. Suddenly, he yelled, "Look, what are they doing?" Nick Stratos looked in the direction of his finger. Not far from the bridge, there was a group of teenagers swimming in the river. They were not playing in the water. Instead, they were in several groups, one after the other, rushing to swim from the north bank to the south bank and back. The Greeks were a race of the sea, and there were many people who were good at swimming. However, it was rare to see every child wearing leather armor in such an intense and exciting swimming scene. "Are they in a competition?" Stesippus said uncertainly. "They are in military training," a middle-aged man with a broken right arm, who had been leaning on the railing for a long time, interrupted. Stesippus looked him up and down and asked curiously, "Military training?" "They are all students of the Turin Academy. According to the requirements of the Dionia education law, besides learning knowledge, they also have to undergo military training," the middle-aged man explained. "It's too cruel for such young children to be forced to do such dangerous exercises. What if they drown because of their physical strength? What if they get hurt by the boat?" Nickstratus said unhappily. In fact, not only were there instructors swimming in the river, there were also a few boats parked on the river, ready to rescue them at any time. However, the middle-aged man didn't explain much. Instead, he said calmly, "Ferocious enemies won't be spared just because they're young. Only by going through strict training can you kill your enemies on the battlefield and not be killed by them." Nicestratus was speechless for a moment and simply walked away quickly. The men of Dionia, be they young or middle-aged, all spoke with an air of disgust. No wonder people called Dionia little Spartans. Their methods were indeed cruel. The middle-aged man ignored the departure of these foreigners and continued to pay attention to the children's training in the river. It was not until the instructor called them to the shore that he crossed the bridge unhurriedly and went down to the riverbank. "Hey, Paliandrus, my brother!" An instructor saw him and came forward to give him a warm hug. Both of them were once soldiers of the 1st Division Aminta's brigade, so it was natural for them to have a deep friendship. "Your son is still performing well as usual. Today, he won first place in his group in the armed swimming training." The instructor praised him without hesitation. "I saw it on the bridge. I say, Paliandrus, You've been so concerned about your son's military training recently. Are you planning to let him replace you as a soldier of the Legion of Dionysia when he grows up? The instructor joked. Unexpectedly, Polyandrus nodded seriously. I want him to join the 1st Division. The instructor was stunned for a moment and then advised, My brother, although Patroclus has performed well, he hasn't been fighting for several years now. There are more than 10,000 people in the reserve team of the Legion. It's not that easy to enter the 1st Division. Besides, he's not even 18 years old yet. Even if he's old enough to serve in the military, the officers won't be so eager to send a recruit like him to the battlefield. It's better to let him train himself in the reserve team to become a qualified soldier of the Legion. Polyandrus thought about it and admitted that the instructor was right. However, he was still a little worried and asked, I don't know the current situation of the Legion. How long do you think it will take for Patroclus to enter the official Legion after he enters the reserve team? Especially the 1st Division? The instructor smiled. You should spend more time with your old brothers in the 1st Division, especially our boss, Captain Amyntas. He's the most sentimental. Do you know that he's just been appointed as the commander of the 2nd Division this year? If your son wants to enter the 2nd Division, he can just say the word. Even if you insist on letting Patroclus enter the 1st Division, with the friendship between Amyntas and Antonios, the commander of the 1st Division, it's just a word from him. Polyandrus silently listened to the advice of his comrade. Indeed, since he was injured, he had less contact with his comrades and officers. Now, for the sake of his son, it was time to make some changes. By the way, haven't you been studying in school recently, preparing to take the assessment of Turii and become the village chief? How are you doing now? The instructor suddenly remembered and asked curiously. Polyandrus smiled bitterly. I didn't know a word before. Now that I'm old, my memory isn't good. Just remembering those letters is enough to give me a headache. Then you have to work harder. I'm still waiting for you to enter the Senate in the future. Take care of us old comrades. The instructor joked. Polyandrus smiled, which was rare. Father. Patroclus, who had already changed his clothes, walked over. School's over. Patroclus nodded. He was almost 17 years old, and he was taller than Polyandrus. Although he was not as strong as the instructor, his body was well proportioned and strong. 4 students who were about to become adults like him, the school's afternoon classes were no longer ordinary sports competitions and military training. Instead, they were more rigorous and began to practice close to actual combat to prepare for entering the army. Polyandrus, don't forget what I told you, the instructor reminded him loudly when he saw the father and son walking away. Polyandrus waved his hand gratefully. Father, what did you say to the instructor? Patroclus asked curiously. About you entering the 1st Army. Polyandrus told his son truthfully. Patroclus let out a long whistle. I heard from Stephos that it's impossible for a recruit like me to enter the 1st Army at the beginning. But I believe that no matter which army I'm in, I'll be the one holding the flag at the triumphal parade. Polyandrus patted the child's shoulder with relief. Although Patroclus had a jumpy personality, he was an extremely confident child. When the father and son left the academy, Patroclus suddenly stopped and shouted, Hey, Cynthia! Cynthia, who was going home with her classmates, turned around and smiled at him. Patroclus winked. The hairband on your head is loose. Cynthia reached out to touch her hair and realized that she had been tricked. She immediately spat and scolded, Annoying Parlo. Patroclus laughed and stared at Cynthia until she walked away before withdrawing his gaze. As an experienced person, how could Polyandrus not understand his son's thoughts? It was just that most people in Turin knew the identity of the girl, the adopted daughter of the consul Devers, and he was just an ordinary citizen of Dionia who had just obtained citizenship not long ago. The difference in status between the two sides was huge. However, his son was stubborn and had his own ideas since he was young, so he couldn't say anything. He only hoped that it was just a simple love from the child. When he grew up, everything would change. Cynthia said goodbye to her girlfriend and walked into her home. The servant quickly came over and took her school bag. She immediately bowed to him to express her gratitude. Today, the Devers' residence was expanded again, divided into 3 courtyards: front, middle, and back. The front courtyard was where the ordinary slaves lived, and the stables were also here. The middle courtyard was where the Devers worked and discussed matters, and there were also slave butlers' and office workers' bedrooms. The back courtyard was where the Devers and their families lived. Cynthia went straight forward, and wherever she went, the slaves saluted her, and Cynthia returned the salute one by one. This was the Devers family rule, and although Cynthia didn't understand it, it had become a habit. After entering the central courtyard, she even met Aristyras face to face. Cynthia was more afraid of this attendant of her father. She always felt that his eyes, which were less black than white, seemed to have some kind of magic that could see through people's hearts. In comparison, among the attendants of the Devers, she preferred the former scribe, Aristyras. Unfortunately, he had become a citizen of Dionia, and under the suggestion of the Devers, he had passed the union's examination and become a judge in the Turin court. Cynthia pushed open the room in the back courtyard, and a familiar voice came. "Oh, Cynthia is back." Christoia stood by the garden and looked at her with a smile. Asuna was bending over to pull the weeds out of the flowers. "Mother!" Cynthia called out and ran forward to give Christoia a hug. After a few years of being together, this sexy, elegant, and kind woman in front of her had replaced the image of her mother that was gradually fading in her heart. "Be gentle. You rash little girl, don't scare your sister." Christoia subconsciously covered her slightly protruding belly and flicked Cynthia's forehead with a reproachful look. "Sister, I apologize for disturbing your sleep." Cynthia leaned close to Christoia's belly and said playfully. Then, she suddenly shouted in surprise, "She kicked me! Mother, sister kicked me!" Chapter 346. She kicked again. Christoia shouted with a blissful smile. Asuna ran out of the garden, wiped the dust off her hands on her clothes, and helped Christoia sit down with Cynthia. After the 3 women played around, Christoia felt a little hungry. "Cynthia, your brother is back. He's playing with Crow upstairs. Go up and tell them to come down. Let's get ready for dinner." The brother Christoia was referring to was Cynthia's own brother, Adonis. He was 8 years old and was also studying at the Turii school. Cynthia got up and was about to go upstairs when she saw a plate of something black on the wooden table next to her. She asked curiously, "What's this?" "This is meat jerky that your Aunt Andrea smoked with beef and salt, according to your father's suggestion. It was specially sent from Grimentum for us to try first," Christoia said. Cynthia grabbed a small piece and took a bite. "It's a little hard." She chewed hard for a while and swallowed. "It tastes good after a while, but it's a little salty. It's good as a snack. Your father plans to use this jerky as part of the soldiers' rations." Cynthia's unintentional words made Christoia's eyes light up. She only cared about the taste. As for using too much salt, she didn't care. Ever since the Devers asked the people at the Dionia school to think of a way to improve the method of drying salt, the production of sea salt had increased greatly and the price of salt was extremely low. Cynthia stuffed the whole jerky into her mouth and walked around the garden. There was a small altar on the other side of the garden. A stone statue of Artemis smiled with a bow. The statue was exactly the height of a person and was carved very vividly. After Agnes, the Pearl of Lygium, married the Devers, she couldn't forget her time as the priestess of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, even though the Devers made her the chief priestess of the temple of Hera. After getting her husband's permission, she built a small altar of Artemis in the backyard. She didn't expect Cynthia to become a believer of the goddess. Perhaps it was because the Greeks regarded Artemis as the goddess of the moon, and the night was her world. The name, Cynthia, originally meant moon, so there was a natural sense of closeness. So Cynthia prayed to Artemis devoutly before she walked into the main building. Seeing Cynthia enter the building, Asuna hesitantly said to Christoia, "Madam, aren't we going to wait for Madam Agnes to come back for dinner?" Christoia was stunned for a moment before she smiled and said, "She has to prepare for tomorrow's wedding celebration. She'll probably be busy in the temple until late at night. We don't have to wait for her. With her personality, she won't care." "What about Master?" "Don't wait." The Senate had been in a meeting for the past 2 days, and no one knew when it would end. It's all because of those nobles and merchants who caused trouble in the square, and that damned Polixus. Once this matter was brought up, Christoia was a little annoyed. "Esteemed elders, it's not just in Turiae, but also in Cremissa, Picassus, Armandora, and other cities. Many people have come to the square to protest. Please open the door and listen to their voices. Listen, they are shouting, 'Call for a citizens' assembly.'" Polixus' impassioned speech was immediately interrupted by Antonio's. "As far as I know, in Turiae and Cremissa, there are actually only a small number of people protesting. It's not a majority like you said. Moreover, such a thing did not happen at all in Amandolora and Picosis." "That's right, as a citizen of Armandora, I can attest to the truth of Antonio's words," Scombres said. Polixus had expected that someone would say this, so he sneered. "Just because no one said anything doesn't mean that no one has any objections. The citizens are just hiding their dissatisfaction in their hearts, not daring to express it. Now that I think about it, it's funny. Their demands are very simple and not excessive. Do we really need to be so nervous? You know, as long as it's a city-state established by the Greeks, there will definitely be a citizens' assembly. Even if we go back to the era of kings a few hundred years ago, as long as there is a king, the citizens' assembly still exists. Only a city-state under the rule of a tyrant, because they are afraid of the people, they dare not have a citizens' assembly, just like Syracuse." As Polixus spoke, he turned to face the Devers in front of him and mustered up his courage to ask, "May I ask, honorable consul, is our alliance being ruled by a tyrant?" As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. The Devers remained calm, as if he didn't know that Polixus' words were directed at him. Of course not. The Dionia alliance is under the joint management of the elders of the Senate. The Devers' words were indifferent, without a trace of anger. "Then does the law of Dionia prohibit the holding of a citizens' assembly?" Polixus became bolder and continued to ask. "Of course not." The Devers still answered unhurriedly. "In this case, it's reasonable for the people to request for a citizens' assembly. I hope the Senate will carefully consider this matter, and not let the citizens down." Polixus saw that the Devers had fallen into his trap, so he took the opportunity to speak loudly. "Honorable Polixus, holding a citizens' assembly is not an easy thing to do." Cunigurata stood up and said, "The situation of the Dionia alliance is very different from that of the other Greek city-states. Our citizens are not concentrated in one city-state, but in all the cities of the alliance. Just gathering them is a big problem that requires both time and energy. In addition, the citizens of Dionia are not only Greeks, but also Lucarians and Bruttii. They don't know what a citizens' assembly is, and they have never participated in one before. If we hold a citizens' assembly rashly, not only will they be at a loss, it is very likely that the order of the citizens' assembly will fall into chaos, and we will become the laughingstock of our neighbors." Cunigurata enumerated the difficulties of holding a citizens' assembly in Dionia. In fact, he had a private thought in his mind. As a powerful person in the Senate of Dionia, he didn't want the citizens' assembly to be held, because he was tired of the times when he was in Turiae. In order to be elected as a general, he had to please the citizens, attack his political enemies, and do things against his will. After being elected, if he was not careful, his political enemies might incite the citizens and force him to step down. It was far better to do things in a down-to-earth manner now, and only need to be responsible to the Alliance, to Devers. In fact, there were many people who had the same idea as him, such as Cornelis, Scombras, and so on, some of the elders who had always been in charge of the Alliance. Master Cunagurata is right. We Britty people don't care about the Citizens' Assembly. As long as we have food to eat, women to sleep, and wine to drink, that's enough. Sidorum pretended to be bold and said loudly, "We Britty people only believe that whoever is stronger, whoever has the bigger fist, they will obey. We Lucarians are the same. The Citizens' Assembly is too troublesome. We are not interested." Hemont immediately responded. The other two major forces in the Senate, Lucaria and Britty, objected, which made Polixus' face a little ugly, but he still didn't intend to give up, and continued to say, "It is difficult to hold a citizens' assembly, but if we give up because of the difficulty, is this the way we Dionia people do things? The construction of Turii, Lau's Avenue requires us to cross over the mountains. It is very difficult, but didn't we finally finish it after a few years of hard work? The citizens have been looking forward to the Citizens' Assembly for a long time. When Dionia was first established, it was faced with a threat to its survival, so it had to unify the minds of the people and concentrate all its strength to defeat the strong enemy. Therefore, it was completely understandable that the Citizens' Assembly, which took a lot of time and energy, was temporarily stopped. But now, Dionia is stable and prosperous, the people are rich and leisurely, as the Greeks who have a strong tradition of participating in the politics of the city. The citizens of Dionia have always demanded for the Citizens' Assembly to be held more and more year after year. As the most honorable representatives of the citizens of Dionia, I hope you can deeply understand this point, and make the right choice in time. Don't wait until the citizens' dissatisfaction accumulates to a dangerous level before you make a decision in a hurry. That will not be good for the Senate and the Alliance of Dionia." Polixus's passionate yet threatening words caused the expressions of many of the people present to change slightly. The Devers looked at Polixus thoughtfully. Now, it is up to everyone to vote on whether to pass the motion to convene the Citizens' Assembly. The rotating president, Cornelis, announced loudly. As usual, the Legion elders expressed their opposition, and so did the Lucanian elders. Most of the elders with real power also disagreed. Those who supported Polixus were mostly elders who had not been put in an important position, and most of them were from the Turii faction. But among those who supported the motion, the Devers saw Bucos, Peteru, and even the navy commander of Dionia, Inanilos. The Devers narrowed his eyes, and a faint cold light flashed through his eyes. When he came out of the Senate, it was already late. The spring night was still cool, but Polixus's Bolton shirt was completely soaked. That was the result of cold sweat when he questioned the Devers. Although his motion was rejected again, Polixus was now confident, because he saw that the number of people supporting him was increasing. The Devers were only SOSO, next time. He thought excitedly, and his steps became more vigorous, and the voices of the elders with him became louder. Chapter 347. The Devers said calmly, "Marigi, have you heard of an ancient saying from the East?" "What saying?" "If the gods wish to destroy them, they must first make them mad." Nycstratus, Statopus, and Lycasus stood in front of the gate of the Dionia Academy. It was a strangely shaped gate. It was a large, pure white arch with a huge stone ball resting on top of it. A thick, sword-shaped stone tablet extended straight up from the middle of the arch, holding up the arch and dividing the arch into two. There was a sentence carved on the stone tablet: "All things have their own rules, and only those who persevere in their search can obtain their secrets." Nycstratus listened carefully to the sentence and nodded. He looked down and saw the signature, Devers. "Devers? Which Devers?" Nycstratus asked in surprise. "Who else? Of course it's the Archon of Dionia," Statopus replied. "This is a place where scholars gather, a sacred place. What right does he have to be here?" Nycstratus' expression changed, and he was about to say something. Statopus was shocked and hurriedly stopped him. Don't talk nonsense. The Devers isn't just an archon. He's respected by the doctors of Dionia, and even the scholars who study mathematics respect him. It's said that they've received a lot of inspiration from the Devers, so everyone in the academy respects him. Besides, I've heard the Devers' lecture last year. His medical knowledge is indeed unique and thought-provoking. No wonder so many people say that he's the emissary of the gods. If these people hear you insult him here, they'll definitely fight you. I'm not afraid of the people of Dionia, Nycstratus muttered stubbornly. He did not say anything else and walked through the gate with Statopus. Lycasus kept his eyes on the ball on top of the arch. He stepped through the gate with trepidation, but after a few steps, he could not help but look back. He muttered to himself, "What's the point of putting such a heavy stone ball on top of the arch? Aren't they afraid that it'll fall?" "Little fellow, you don't understand." A young man in his 20s stood behind the gate, loudly explaining, "The dome symbolizes the land we live in. Wait, are you saying that the ground under our feet is round?" Lycasus interrupted him in surprise. "Of course. Otherwise, why would I always see the sail first when I look at a ship sailing in the distance? You know, as early as 200 years ago, Thales of Miletus once. Forget it, I can't explain this to you in a short time. You just have to remember that the land we live on is a big ball," the young man said impatiently. Then, he pointed at the vault and said, "Look at this vault again. What does it look like?" Lycasus took a closer look. "Oh, it's a pair of arms. That's right. Lifting the sphere with both hands means that humans can transform the earth," the young man said excitedly. "But what will we use to overcome the terrible disaster and transform the earth? How would I know?" Lycasus glared at the young man who was forcefully pulling him back. "Do you see the words engraved on that stone tablet?" The young man pointed at the sword-shaped stone tablet and said in high spirits, "It depends on knowledge, on exploration, and on scholars like us who constantly study hard. This gate designed by Sir Devers is too profound." Lycasus sneered, dissatisfied with the young man's boasting. The young man obviously did not notice Lycasus's expression. He was still holding Lycasus's hand and said, "Now, I'll tell you why the stone ball doesn't break the vault and fall. That's because the vault has the characteristic of distributing weight to both ends." As he said that, he picked up a branch and drew a gravity decomposition diagram on the ground. Of course, the gravity of the stone ball can't be completely dispersed. The pressure on the vault still exists, and the support of the stone tablet is the key. Poor Lycasus was completely bewildered by the young man's professional explanation. It was as if he was listening to a heavenly book. Nycstratus, who had been listening to the side out of curiosity, was now completely impatient. He shouted, "Lycasus, it's time to go. It's getting dark, don't miss the registration." "Yes." Lycasus was so frightened that he pulled his hand back, almost causing the young man to fall. "Registration? Registration for what?" The young man looked at them in confusion. "We're here to participate in a medical forum," Statopus replied. "You're here to find doctors who work with corpses and skeletons." The young man suddenly realized. "Hurry up and go. Hurry up and go." He immediately lost interest in teaching and slapped away Lycasus's hand, as if afraid of being tainted by bad luck. "What's wrong with this man? He's crazy," Lycasus muttered to himself as he followed Statopus. The trees in the school were lush and green. A small path paved with gravel was hidden in the shade of the trees, and the branches crisscrossed. The three of them had not gone far when they suddenly heard an urgent call. "Careful, don't step on it." Statopus hurriedly stopped in his tracks. Only then did he see a man curled up on the ground beside him, holding a piece of limestone in his hand. In front of him was a relatively flat paving stone that was densely covered with words and symbols. The man used his body to protect the stone, looked up at them, and urged them with dissatisfaction, "Go away! Go away!" These people are probably scholars from some mathematics research institute in this Dionia Academy. It's said that most of them are from the Pythagorean school of Tarentum, Statopus explained to the dissatisfied Nick Stratos. So it's this group of lunatics. Nick Stratos suddenly understood. The Pythagorean school worshipped mathematics as their god, and often held some strange rituals. Their whereabouts were secretive, and in the early years, they had close ties with the nobles of the various cities of Greece. They opposed democracy, so many people regarded them as heretics and avoided them. Dionia actually accepted them. Nick Stratos felt a little disgusted. When they saw someone leaning against a tree trunk, looking up at the sky, muttering to himself, someone with lifeless eyes, walking like a puppet, no one knowing what he was thinking, someone who was originally lying on the muddy ground, suddenly leaping up with wild joy and many other strange words and actions, the three of them no longer found it strange. After going around a few tall trees, a small pavilion appeared in front of them. Many people had formed a circle in the pavilion, and there seemed to be something placed in the center. They fiddled with the object while arguing fiercely. Curious, Lycasus approached the pavilion and heard them saying something like, "How long should the span of the bridge be? Where should it be built to ensure the level of the bridge? How many piers are needed to support this bridge? How far should it be? You're here to participate in the medical forum, right?" Someone walked out of the crowd and asked quickly when he saw the medical kit on Lycasus' waist. Before Lycasus could answer, Stasipus had already bowed and said respectfully, "Hello, Dr. Stasichodas." "You are?" Stasichodas looked at him in confusion, trying hard to find his name in his memory. "I'm Dr. Stasipus from Crotone, and this is Dr. Nick Stratos and Lycasus, both from Crotone." Stasipus immediately introduced himself. "Oh, look at my memory, I'm really sorry. I remember, last year you gave a lecture on, the application of aloe in sports bruises." Stasichodas slapped his forehead and said apologetically, "Yes, that was a little bit of my experience from last year's exchange. It's been so long and you still remember it?" Stasipus' face was full of joy. "Of course I remember. Inspired by your lecture, some doctors in our medical school have done more in-depth research on aloe this year, and there have been some new developments, which will be mentioned in this forum," Stasichodas said seriously. "That's great." Stasipus couldn't help but cheer, completely forgetting about Nick Stratos, who was a little unnatural beside him. However, Stasichodas didn't forget, and he took the initiative to step forward and salute. "Welcome, Dr. Nick Stratos." Nick Stratos returned the salute in a reserved manner. "And you, Nick Stratos? Welcome to Dionia Academy," Stasichodas said enthusiastically, and at the same time, he led them in the direction of the medical school. "I'm really sorry. Today is my turn to greet the doctors who came to participate in the forum at the entrance of the academy. It's just that I'm a little tired after standing for so long, so I took a break in the gazebo and listened to the Mathematics Research Institute discuss the construction of the stone bridge. I didn't expect to almost miss you," Stasichodas said embarrassedly as he walked. Stasipus was stunned. "You mean the construction of the stone bridge?" Chapter 348. Stratus and Nyx looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock. When Nyx turned back to look at the group of people who were still arguing in the gazebo, the feeling in his heart was naturally very different from before. He turned back and looked at Stesichordas, who was walking in front of him. He pulled Stratus over and asked in a low voice, "Who is this man? You have so much respect for him." "He's the deputy director of the medical hospital in the Dionia Academy. Not only is his medical skills superb, but he's also very knowledgeable," Stratus praised in a low voice. "His medical skills are superb? How is he compared to you?" Nyx did not care about the other party's position. He only cared about the actual medical skills. "I can't compare to him at all. The difference is like the difference between a child and an adult. When you see the patients he treats and listen to his lectures, you'll understand, Stratus said sincerely. Nix was completely stunned. He felt that his medical skills were not much different from Stratus's. Was this inconspicuous middle-aged man really that good? At night, in a village outside the city of Turii, in a house in the village, after dinner, Stratus asked his wife to pour him a glass of wine. He sat alone in the courtyard, sipping his tea while contemplating the stars. From time to time, he would see the slaves cleaning the farm tools in the courtyard, and the sound of his son reading came from the lit oil lamp in the house. Such a life was so comfortable. Stratus thought back to himself a few years ago and could not help but feel glad that he had made the right choice. He still felt a little guilty for betraying Crotone, but he had done many things for Crotone and Myron, including risking his life to lurk near Nepetia, obtain important information, and make important contributions to Crotone's assistance to Trine in repelling the Briti. However, his life had always been difficult until he was instigated by Aristyras. After the Devers defeated Crotone, they fulfilled their promise and brought his wife and child back safely. From then on, he began his life in Turii. Under the arrangement of the Devers, he officially joined the Mountain Reconnaissance Brigade to accumulate military achievements. At the same time, he secretly worked for Aristyras and served the consul. Until last year, he finally officially became a citizen of Dionia and obtained the land that every Greek dreamed of. At the same time, his child also entered the school of Dionia, and his family also bought 2 slaves to work in the fields. All this happy life came from him making the right choice. Thinking of this, he felt that he should pray to the Hades. In the beginning, he was often plagued by guilt and could not even sleep at night. In the end, he listened to Aristyras' suggestion and went to the confessional in the Temple of Hades, and only then did he gradually get rid of it. Just as he was devoutly chanting the hymn of the Hades, there was a rhythmic knock on the door. "Who is it?" Stratus quickly rushed behind the door and whispered. "Stratus, it's me." A low voice came from outside the door, and it was particularly clear in the silent night. It was the voice of Aristyras. Stratus was startled. Usually, as his superior, Aristyras always called him to his residence to report on the situation and assign tasks. He had never been to Stratus' house in person, let alone at night. He hurriedly opened the door, and under the moonlight, the slender figure of Aristyras appeared in front of him. Aristyras glanced at the courtyard behind Stratus with a serious expression, and then walked in quietly. Stratus hurriedly closed the door gently, and found an excuse to drive the slave away to rest. Aristyras stood quietly in the corner of the courtyard. The courtyard wall and the tall willow tree blocked the moonlight from the sky, so his figure was completely shrouded in darkness. Stratus arranged everything properly and immediately rushed over to receive the order. Aristyras did not waste any time and said directly in a low voice, "His Excellency has given the order. The matter you are responsible for can begin to be carried out." Stratus' heart tightened again. The His Excellency that Aristyras mentioned could only be the first person in Dionia whom he feared and was grateful for. Then, he became excited again. "Boss, where should we start?" The two whispered for a while. After watching Aristyras leave, Stratus could not suppress the excitement in his heart, and suddenly clapped his hands together. Clap! The clear sound of the clapping in the night was welcomed by his wife's shout in the house. "Stratus? It's okay, you go to sleep first." Stratus hurriedly comforted her and at the same time told himself, "Calm down, calm down." Although this was a great opportunity to make a great contribution, this matter was of great importance. Moreover, it involved many people. If they were not of high status, then they were extremely wealthy. He had to be careful. Think carefully. Think carefully. Was there any mistake in the entire implementation process? So, Stratus put his hands behind his back and strolled around the courtyard for most of the night while thinking. The next morning, the sky was blue and the temperature was just right. It was the perfect weather for a trip. The residents of Turin got up early, washed up, and ate. They placed flowers in front of their homes and sprinkled clean water on the street. Then, the men dressed up neatly, and the women dressed up beautifully, rushed to the east gate in pairs. The construction of the Temple of Hera in Turin began 2 years ago, mainly because the marriage festival of Dionia was becoming more and more grand and influential. However, there was no Temple of Hera in the city of Turin. Every time before the marriage festival, they had to go to Heraclea to invite the priest of Hera. Moreover, the venue of the festival could only be Victory Square, which was somewhat inappropriate and not in line with the identity of the center of the Dionia alliance. Therefore, in response to the needs of the people and the development of the city, the Senate approved the construction of the Temple of Hera. However, the cost of the construction of the Temple of Hera was not paid from the national treasury. At that time, the national treasury's money was used for various infrastructure and was already stretched. It was a generous donation from the consul Devers. Due to the example he set, and the subsequent donations from many senators of the Senate and some businessmen, the Temple of Hera was completed after more than a year of construction. At that time, the location of the Temple of Hera was also considered. After the Brity War, the political situation of Dionia was stable. After a few years of rapid development, the number of citizens in the city of Turin skyrocketed. There was not enough open space to accommodate a new temple complex, so it could only be built outside the city. This was also the reason why the Senate began to put the expansion of the city of Turin on the agenda. The people of Dionia went against the Greek tradition of building temples on high places and built the Temple of Hera of Turin on the bank of the Kratai River outside the city, on the flat land between the city of Turin and the port. In the early morning, the people of Dionia gathered from all directions to the Temple of Hera to participate in the annual festival celebration. The sun in the sky had not yet begun to emit its brilliance, but there was already a sea of people outside the Temple of Hera, which greatly increased the pressure on the patrol team responsible for maintaining order. At the same time, as the number of engaged couples who participated in the blessing this year reached as high as 500, the temples of the two gods on both sides of the front of the great Temple of Hera, the goddess of seasons, Ayaz, and the goddess of rainbows, Iris, were filled with newlyweds. Just when the people outside the square of the temple were tormented by the crowding and noise, they vaguely heard the sound of a bell coming from the southwest, from the city of Turin, followed by a strong sound. They knew that the sound of the bell came from the giant 4-ton bronze bell of the Temple of Hades. It rang 9 times in a row. 1, 2, 3. Then the people also shouted in unison, echoing the sound of the bell, counting to 9. According to the legend among the people, the birthday of Hades was September 9th, so not only did Dionia change the annual celebration of Hades to September 9th, but every major celebration, the bell of the Temple of Hades would ring 9 times. The celebration was about to begin. The people of Dionia cheered up. As for why the Temple of Hades, as the king of Hades, could announce the beginning of the celebration of Queen Hera, the people of Dionia had long forgotten about such questions, and they had already gotten used to it. In the past 5 years, the unremitting efforts of Plazinas and his subordinates had made the people of Dionia regard Hades as the patron saint of the alliance, the giver of stability and prosperity for Dionia. The people began to stir, because they saw groups of musicians holding lyres, flutes, brass horns, drums came to the steps in front of the temple and stood neatly. More than a dozen female priests in white robes walked out of the temple and stood in front of the platform. When the melodious music started, the noise also subsided. The female priests began to chant in unison, but it was not a song for Goddess Hera, but for her daughter, the goddess of youth, Hebe. Therefore, the new song was cheerful and lively. As the song started, in another temple in front of the temple, the goddess of youth, Hebe, dozens of young girls jumped into the square with light steps, dancing along with the beautiful song, and from time to time, they changed into various formations and styles. Since the opening ceremony of the Temple of Hades, the spectacular and magnificent dramatic dance shocked the people of Dionia. It had also opened up a new form of art, and the priests of the temples even regarded it as one of the necessary rituals for the celebration of the gods. Looking at the cheerful dance of the girls in the square, listening to the slightly strong rhythm of the music, many women outside the square also began to twist their waists. After the song of Hebe, the girls retreated, and the female priests on the platform of the temple let out a gentle resonance, like the sound of nature. The people all stood on their tiptoes and looked toward the temple. They knew that it was time for the main character to appear. Chapter 349. The entire plaza suddenly became deathly silent. The priestess seemed oblivious to the situation outside, and slowly walked to the front of the platform without looking sideways. She used a torch to light the brazier in front of her, the raging flames representing the blessings of the gods. She then faced the plaza and gently opened her lips. A gentle and penetrating voice that was hard to imagine came from her seemingly frail body, and the crowd could not help but be intoxicated by it. With her as the leader, the priestesses chanted Hera's ode together. The song was filled with love for children, concern for women, admonition for marriage, and protection of the family. Thus, the song was neither resounding nor sorrowful, but like that of an elder, unhurried and unhurried. After the ode ended, the plaza was still quiet, and the people seemed to be immersed in the teachings of the ode. At this moment, the flames in the brazier suddenly became visibly more vigorous. Hera has shown herself. She's paying attention to us. The crowd immediately clamored, believing this to be a good omen. The priestess Agnes smiled slightly, and this smile was like sunlight shining into the hearts of the people. The great Hera blesses you. As soon as she finished speaking, the crowd finally began to cheer, and melodious music began to play. Couples were let in by the patrol team, and they entered the plaza one after another. The entire plaza quickly became crowded. They began to clumsily dance to the music. The Greeks were a race that excelled at athletics but not at dancing. The Devers had made a simple adaptation of social dance from their previous world, and had specially trained couples perform it at the wedding celebration last year. It immediately attracted the admiration of the people, and they all fought to learn it. This time, everyone held back their energy and entered bravely, showing off the elegance of their families. The couples kept the beat in the narrow space, taking simple steps, looking at each other, turning in circles, and changing their gestures. Although the movements were simple and repetitive, the crowd became happier the more they danced, and even the people outside the plaza began to sing and dance. In the dance, the wife felt that the husband was even more charming, and the husband felt that the wife was even more beautiful. Everyone was intoxicated, and this was the reason why the Devers had designed this segment. The family was the foundation of the city, and a strong family meant peace. Even the priestess on the platform could not help but move her delicate body slightly, humming softly. At this moment, a lively priestess gathered her courage and asked Agnes in a small voice, "Priestess, this dance was created by the Archon. Do you usually dance with him at home?" The priestess' words caused Agnes' rosy lips to curl into a smile. She was a more traditional Greek woman. When the Lygian people rejected Dionysius's proposal, no one dared to marry her. She had no complaints and silently entered the temple of Artemis as a priest. After a few years, she thought that she would live such a plain life and grow old alone. But Artemis took pity on the beautiful girl. Syracuse's power threatened Lygium's survival. Agnes shouldered the hopes of the entire city and was sent to the unfamiliar land of Thurii. She had thought that the legendary famous general, the wise consul of Dionia, would be a tyrannical person. However, the Devers had surprised her with their gentleness and consideration that transcended this era. But now, she put on a stern face and berated them. This is a celebration. By Hera's grace, we must devote ourselves. The priestesses all knew that although Agnes was the chief priest of the Temple of Hera, she had a gentle personality and treated her subordinates kindly. She would not get angry, but they still obediently stopped talking and stood properly. In the temple of the rainbow goddess Elis, Ephialtes was currently excited and nervous. Every moment felt like a year. He looked around and found that most of the men and women were like this. Only a young man attracted his attention, but he was sitting upright on the ground with his eyes closed, as if he was asleep. Ephialtes curiously sized him up, but found that he did not know this person. He did not know that this man's identity was extraordinary. The former prince of Sparta, Leotychides, was his name. After living in Thurii for a few years, Leotychides was now a citizen of Dionia and a captain of the First Legion. Under the urging of his old servant, he had found a partner. However, the aesthetics of the people of Sparta were different from that of ordinary Greek. They liked women with strong bodies, distinct personalities, and could even be described as valiant. Just like his mother, when Leotychides first went to the battlefield, she had personally given him a newly made bronze shield and told him, either use it to fight or be carried back by it. Thus, Leotychides was engaged to a strong-willed broody girl from Ciudad Abyssinia. Everyone, please line up as soon as possible. The blessing ceremony is about to begin. Once the music starts, follow me into the square slowly, one by one. Understood? The priest in charge of guiding the newlyweds reminded them again. Ephialtes' spirits were lifted. It's finally starting. A soothing, gentle, yet solemn music entered the temple. The priestess holding the flower basket took the lead out of the temple, while Ephialtes' fiancée held his arm and followed. The moment they entered the square, the two were stunned. It was already a sea of flowers. Colorful petals were scattered from the hands of the people at the side of the square, as well as from the hands of adorably dressed children shuttling through the square. They fluttered down and turned into a carpet of flowers for the couple to step on. Outside the square, thousands of people were still waving colorful cloth and cheering loudly for them. There were even friends and acquaintances who directly called out their names and offered their blessings. Under the attention of tens of thousands of people, every couple was excited, as if they had already become the happiest couple in the world. When the music ended, they were already standing at the foot of the steps in front of Hera's temple. Agnes waited for the noise outside the square to die down before saying loudly, "Young men and women, Cupid shot you with an arrow of love. Under Aphrodite's guidance, you fell into the river of love, and under Hera's watch you came here. Hera asked me to ask the men here, are you willing to become the husband of this beautiful woman beside you? Are you willing to respect her until you grow old? For the new home you are about to build, you won't work, you won't break the law, and you will do your best to become an outstanding citizen of the city, building and protecting your own home?" Yes. Every man answered loudly without hesitation, because the priest's question was exactly what they were fighting for. "Women here, Hera asked me to ask you, are you willing to become the wife of this strong man beside you? Are you willing to love him, respect him, and take care of him until you grow old? Are you willing to take care of his house, manage his slaves, and raise his children until they grow up to become outstanding citizens of the city?" The delicate women answered with incomparable determination, "Yes." Agnes looked outside the square. "Is there anyone who objects to any of the couples here becoming husband and wife? If there is, please say it now." No one objected. Agnes exhaled softly, opened her arms and announced loudly, "I now declare that under Hera's witness, you have become husband and wife. I hope that you will love each other from now on until the end of time. If anyone destroys your marriage and family, then no matter who it is, they will suffer Hera's wrath and the justice of the Dionia alliance. Now every husband on the field can kiss your beautiful wife." Just as Agnes finished speaking, the flames in the brazier beside her suddenly flared up, flashing with sparks. "Hera! Hera!" The people and newcomers cried out in alarm. At this moment the music started. Compared to the solemn and sacred melody that had been played when they entered, this melody was beautiful, warm, sweet, and full of happiness. Effie Art's wife blushed and closed her eyes. When their lips met, there was only one thought in her mind. Effie Art's insistence on participating in the Turii marriage festival was the right decision. She had no regrets in this life. As for Leotychides's wife, she opened her eyes and looked at her husband who was kissing her, her eyes glistening with tears. She couldn't help but be surprised. Her husband, who had always been unyielding, was actually crying? She didn't know that Leotychides was thinking of his mother, who had committed suicide due to humiliation, amidst the blessings of tens of thousands of people. At this important moment, he still lacked the blessings of his loved ones. It was already afternoon. The people who had rushed to the temple early in the morning, as well as the newlyweds in the square, were all tired and hungry, but none of them turned around to go home. Instead, they were all eager to try, because the last celebration of the marriage festival was about to begin. When Agnes said the word, "splash water," all the people immediately picked up the earthen jars filled with water from the ground and splashed it at the people nearby. The children who had been in charge of scattering flowers now entered the square and splashed water at the newlyweds, causing the brides to scream and the grooms to stand up to protect them. Among the frolicking children were Cynthia, her younger brother Adoris, and her schoolmates. For a moment there was an uproar inside and outside the square, and water splashed everywhere. The people who had finished splashing water rushed to the Krati River next to the temple, scooped up water, and continued to fight. This was one of the reasons why the temple of Hera was built by the river. After the water was poured on the Krati, the men took off their upper clothes and only tied them around their waists, revealing their strong bodies. The Greeks worshipped physical beauty, and the people of Dionia were no exception. Moreover, the population of this newly established city-state alliance was mainly composed of immigrants, and most of the immigrants were still young. Besides working and living, they had received far more military training than the average Greek city-state. They were stronger, more agile, and more willing to display the results of these training. Chapter 350. The openness and boldness of Dionia women often amazed foreigners who had just arrived in Dionia, and the conservative people would secretly ridicule them as barbaric. But in fact, the formation of this open atmosphere was partly due to the influence of the barbaric style of the Lucanians and Bruttii in the alliance's population. On the other hand, it was also the result of the deliberate indulgence of the higher-ups of the alliance, mainly the Devers. Just think about it, even the chief priest of the Temple of Hera allowed newlyweds to kiss in public and regarded it as sacred, so it was not a big deal for women to show their bodies in public. The people of Dionia were used to it, and this open atmosphere had also attracted the young men and women of the nearby cities of the Alliance of Dionia. Not to mention Castellan, even unmarried men and women from Heraclea and Metapontum came to participate in the marriage festival. The Devers were happy to see this, as it was a sign that these customs of the new alliance of Dionia were leading the fashion, and were deepening their influence on Great Greece. At this time, the people were in a carnival of splashing water, and the patrol soldiers became an awkward existence. A patrol soldier avoided the splashing water and suggested to Rotem, "Captain, no one will cause trouble here at all. Why don't we also join the splashing party?" Rotem was no longer the Bruttii youth, who knew nothing about Dionia a few years ago. A few years of tempering had made him different from before. Of course, he knew that once a citizen of Dionia committed a crime and evaded taxes, it would be extremely difficult to enter the army or hold a public office. Unless the people of Dionia were crazy, they would generally not let themselves make such a mistake. But he still reprimanded, "Let's not take any chances. If something really happens, and you and I are not on duty, we will not be able to escape the blame." The patrol soldier did not speak, and Rotem comforted him again. "The marriage festival is held every year. If you really want to participate, marry a Greek woman next year. I will give you a holiday." Greek women are not that easy to marry, the patrol soldier muttered. According to the laws of Dionia, there were many policies to encourage foreigners to marry Greek women. It was only after the Bruttii region and part of the Leucaria region, Picassus, were incorporated into the alliance of Dionia that a large number of foreigners became citizens or prospective citizens of Dionia, making Greek women extremely popular. Due to Dionia's development over the past few years, the distribution of land was close to saturation. Seeing that there was no hope of getting more land in the short term, the number of free citizens staying in Dionia's territory began to decrease, causing many foreign citizens to turn their attention to the women of neighboring countries. However, most Greek women and families of Dinia could not accept the proposal of foreigners who were originally regarded as barbarians, even if they were Dionia. Don't be discouraged. If it really doesn't work, you can ask Lord Bagalipi to come forward. Rodom's suggestion made the patrol soldier's eyes brighten. Leader Bagalipi was now a member of the Senate of Dionia. As the national power of Dionia grew stronger, the attitude of Greece's city-states towards it became more and more respectful. The elders of the Senate of Dionia were naturally respected by these city-states. With the endorsement of Bagalipi, the chances of a successful marriage proposal naturally increased. While the people of Dionia were wantonly celebrating, foreigners also participated in the ceremony, but most of them had the mentality of watching the fun and did not participate. Among them was Hermes of Syracuse. He looked at the scene in surprise. Although the absurdity of the marriage ceremony was not as ridiculous as the carnival of Dionysus, it was more joyful and lively than it. According to his observation during his stay in Thurii, the people of Dionia were strict, rigid, and even a little cautious. When they went out to do things, they would be a little timid when they encountered patrols. They were far less free and unrestrained than the Greek citizens of other city-states. But what he saw in front of him, combined with the intense and fiery rugby games he had watched before, he had to admit that the people of Dionia were also very crazy. Even compared to the people of Syracuse now, the people of Dionia were also a tyrant city-state. Hermes believed that the Devers were tyrants, but the people of Dionia were happier and less depressed. In Syracuse, perhaps because Dionysius was almost ousted by the people before, when the Carthage army led by Similco approached the city of Syracuse, he implemented a high-handed rule in the city of Syracuse. He hunted down Democrats, increased the number of patrols, patrolled the city all day long, and searched for suspicious people. These were all carried out by mercenaries. He built a few barracks not far from the city, guarded by nearly 5,000 mercenaries. He also granted citizenship to a large number of mercenaries, mainly Campanians, gave them land near Syracuse, and allowed them to build villages and towns to consolidate their rule. At the same time, for his own safety, Dionysius forcibly moved out the people living on Ogygia Island, leaving only himself, his family, and the courtiers who were loyal to him. He also continuously strengthened the walls around Ogygia Island, built fortresses, and guarded by 2,000 mercenaries that he trusted. He completely treated the people of Syracuse as enemies. Hermes shook his head, suppressing these dangerous thoughts in his mind. In any case, he was now appreciated by Dionysius. Not only was he paid well, but he was also promoted quickly. He did not want to be suspected by this tyrant because of an inappropriate word one day. Seeing that the sky was getting dark, Hermes judged that it was about time for Polixus to return. He threw the laughter behind him without any hesitation. According to Polixus's situation in the Senate these few days, the situation was gradually becoming favorable for Polixus. The Devers' seemingly firm power was beginning to waver. It was funny to say that Dionysius's autocratic and oppressive rule made his throne as stable as a mountain. The people trembled in fear, and no one dared to oppose him. On the other hand, the young consul of Dionia was friendly with the people, and his methods were gentle, which made him feel constrained in doing things. Thus, Hermes, Polixus and the others took advantage of this weakness and acted freely. Of course, Hermes would not feel sorry for the Devers. In fact, if this matter was successful, he would be greatly promoted by Dionysius, and it would not be impossible for him to sit side by side with the important minister Philistos. Thinking of this, his heart was burning with passion, and he strode towards Polixus's mansion. As Agnes walked along the corridors of the mansion, the slaves all bowed to greet her. The slaves' attitude towards the two beautiful matriarchs was different. Christoia was shrewd and capable, and was in charge of the household, so everyone was more in awe of her. Agnes, on the other hand, was the priestess of Artemis and then Hera. Although her personality was colder, her temper was gentle, and everyone respected her. When she came to the wooden door of the backyard, she gently pushed it open, and heard a shout, "Happy Marriage Day!" Then, a vast expanse of white flew towards her. She could not help but scream, and water was splashed on her, soaking her whole body. The sneak attack was successful, yea. The Devers celebrated with the excited Adoris like children, while Cynthia snickered at the side. Seeing this scene, Agnes also laughed. As the priestess, she stood high up on the platform, and no one would splash water on her. Looking at the people in the square having such a good time, she would sometimes think enviously, "If only I could splash water on them too!" Now, her wish had come true. "Mother Agnes, hug me! Mother Agnes, hug me!" Little Crow shouted as he ran over. She did not know why, but ever since Agnes had married him, this child had taken a liking to his new mother. Agnes bent down, wanting to pick him up, but suddenly remembered that her clothes were wet and hurriedly stopped him. Little Crow shouted in dissatisfaction, "Stop fooling around, child." Christoia's words caused Little Crow to immediately calm down. "Sister, go take a bath and change your clothes. Asuna has already prepared everything for you." "Thank you, sister," Agnes replied with a smile. She went upstairs. There was a large wooden barrel in the bedroom, and it was filled with water vapor. She reached out to touch it, and the water temperature was just right. She hurriedly took off her priestess' white robe and undershirt, and stepped into the barrel. It was impossible not to feel tired after standing in front of the church for a day. The temperature of the water was just right, and her skin was moisturized, giving her a drowsy feeling. At this moment, a pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind. She was startled at first, but then relaxed. Who else could it be other than her husband? "Agnes, you've worked hard." The Devers spoke gently, his hot breath lightly blowing on her earlobes, making her feel a little numb. "Come, let me see." The Devers's gentle voice carried a sense of urgency. He held her arms with both hands and easily pulled her up. Agnes subconsciously placed her left hand in front of her chest, and her right hand below. The Devers gently pushed her hands away, his eyes gradually burning with flames that burned every inch of her skin, causing her to tremble uncontrollably. "Agnes, my wife, you're as beautiful as Hera!" the Devers excitedly exclaimed. Agnes suddenly smiled craftily, and poured the water in the barrel on the Devers. "Happy Marriage Day." Seeing the Devers pretend to be in a sorry state, she couldn't help but laugh, and her trembling body made her even more alluring. "All right, I'll punish you well," the Devers fiercely said, and picked her up, gently placing her on the bed. Under Agnes's nervous and expectant gaze, the Devers tore off Bolton from his body, and bent down towards her. "My Hera," he whispered and kissed her tender lips. Chapter 351. Although it was supposed to be an exchange, it was mainly the doctors of Dionia speaking. The first day was a discussion of medical theories. Not only had he never heard of all kinds of novel medical terms from the mouths of the young doctors of Dionia, but the unique medical theories and discoveries that he had never heard of had completely subverted his previous knowledge and experience. However, he was lost in thought, as if a window had been opened for him, allowing him to see a new and broader medical world. How could he not be excited? Nisostratus did not have much dinner. He spent the whole night thinking about the knowledge he had heard during the day. At this time, he only hated that his memory was so poor that he could not remember everything. As he lay in bed, he recalled what he had heard during the day, so he did not sleep well the whole night. But early the next morning, he pulled himself together and rushed to the medical school with Stasippus. When they arrived at the gate of the Dionia Academy, hundreds of doctors were already waiting there. Of course, they were not waiting for the 2 doctors of Crotone, but for the arrival of the consul Devers of Dionia. At this time, Nicestratus was not as extreme as he was before he came to Thurii. Through the previous day's study and the conversation with other doctors, he deeply understood the high status of the Devers among the doctors of Dionia. Even the foreign doctors who had heard his speech talked about him with respect. This made Nicestratus curious about the Devers, and he waited quietly like the other doctors. It did not take long for the Devers to arrive, accompanied by the dean of the medical school, helps, and a dozen guards. The doctors were in an uproar and wanted to greet them. The guards immediately wanted to stop them, but they were told to back off by the Devers. He smiled and took the initiative to greet them. Stasippus also immediately asked the doctors to consciously observe the order. The Devers knew most of the foreign doctors who had participated in the forum last year, and they were happy to talk to them. The newcomers were introduced by Helps and Stasippus respectively. The Devers smiled and welcomed their arrival. Clausus, I remember you're a famous doctor from Metapontum. What kind of wonderful speech did you bring this time? Devers said to the doctor in front of him with a smile. Lord Devers, please don't joke around. I don't dare to call myself a famous doctor in front of you. Clausus said humbly. In this sacred place there are no adults. There are only doctors who save lives and medical scholars. Devers smiled and corrected him. Just call me Devers. Devers. Clausus bowed respectfully and said, Corio Pampas of Tarentum was unable to participate in this forum for some reason. He asked me to apologize on his behalf and to express his regret for not being able to hear your wonderful speech. The Devers' expression became a little helpless. He sighed and said, Although there have been some small misunderstandings and conflicts between Dionia and Tarentum in the past 2 years, this should not be an obstacle to academic exchanges. After Tarentum and Messapi reached a peace agreement, their strength gradually recovered. They began to feel annoyed with Heraclea and Metapontum for leaving the Tarentum alliance. Of course, they also hated Dionia, who had once rescued them. However, now the powerful Dionia alliance could only make them swallow their anger. The radical representative Diomyras, who was once ambushed by the Messapi alliance and almost wiped out because of his rash advance, was originally criticized by the citizens' assembly and was almost expelled from the city. He originally had no future in the political arena. However, in the past 2 years, he slyly followed the voice of the people and publicly attacked Dionia many times. He condemned the council for being too soft on Dionia. He regained the support of the frustrated people and was re-elected as consul at the end of last autumn. As a result, the small frictions between Tarentum and Dionia began to become more frequent. The people of Tarentum entered the territory of Metapontum many times for no reason. When the fishing boats of Tarentum and Dionia met at sea, there were from time to time quarrels and fights. The goods stacked by the merchant ships of Dionia in the port of Tarentum were often lost and occasionally seized, and so on. Dionia's diplomatic envoys went to Tarentum many times to protest and negotiate. They once joked that the time they spent traveling to foreign countries in their lifetime was less than the time they spent in Tarentum. But in general, both sides still maintained restraint. After all, they were still allies. Tarentum still faced the pressure of Messapi and Pucetti, and still needed the support of Dionia. It was just that the newly elected general played some tricks to vent the people's depression and respond to the people's expectations of him. As for Dionia, out of guilt for poaching Heraclea and Metapontum, They turned a blind eye and tried their best to keep the peace. Devers sighed in his heart. After greeting the doctors, everyone crowded around him and entered the door. After walking for a while, a man rushed out in front of him. Marcius was shocked and was about to rush forward to stop him. He heard the man shout excitedly, "Devers, it's done! We've done it! We've completed the design of the stone bridge model of the Saraceno River. After testing, there are no problems." It turned out to be Marcius Morris. Marcius slowed down his pace, but this also reminded him. He immediately ordered the guards to patrol around and stop any rash trespassers. At this time, Devers also had a look of joy on his face. "This is great. Give the stone bridge model and data to little Heracrit. When I'm done here, I'll go see your great results. There's another piece of good news. We've designed a new pulley set that allows the arm to lift heavy objects to rotate 360 degrees on the spot. You must come and take a look and give us some suggestions for improvement," Marcius Morris continued. Devers was even more happy and immediately made a promise. Marcius Morris was no longer as ignorant as he was when he first arrived in Amendola. While doing research in the Faculty of Mathematics, he also took on some management tasks. He gave a few reminders and then hurried away. "Who's that?" Nixtratus was curious about the tone of the person who came and talked to Devers. "Marcius Morris, the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Mathematics, a crazy mathematical genius," a doctor from Dionia said. "Dionia is finally starting to build the stone bridge. This is great," a doctor from Heraclea said happily. There were many rivers in Heraclea. During the rainy season, the rivers would surge and almost become a swamp. Although they had asked Dionia to help them build a few wooden bridges, most of the bridges were submerged in the water during the rainy season. The people of Heraclea were worried about the durability of the wooden bridges, which had been soaked in the river for a long time. With the stone bridge, they were much more at ease. Nixtratus contacted the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Mathematics and asked the young consul for advice. Nixtratus, who had a good impression of the Devers just now, looked forward to his speech even more. Devers stood on the podium, and below them were the doctors sitting upright. Under their expectant gazes, Devers cleared his throat and said unhurriedly, "Since we've already greeted each other at the school gate, I won't do the same thing here." The doctors chuckled. Every doctor on the podium had to introduce themselves and greet their peers. This had gradually become a practice in medical forums. Devers smiled, stretched out his right hand, and clenched it into a fist in the air. "What do you think I'm holding in my hand?" "Nothing at all." This was the thought that immediately came to some people's minds. Before they could answer, Devers said, "Air, it's the ubiquitous air. That's the name I gave it. Although it looks like nothing at all, every human and every animal can't live without it. If you don't believe me, you can cover your mouth and nose with a piece of linen to isolate yourself from the air. Soon, you'll suffocate to death. Everyone knows this very well, but why is the seemingly empty air so important to us? What's its relationship with our human bodies? Today, I'll talk about this issue. I hope it can make you think." As soon as Devers finished speaking, the doctors widened their eyes and pricked up their ears. Even Helps and Stesichordas, who were sitting in the front row, leaned forward with excitement on their faces. For air to be in contact with the human body, it must first enter the human body. The entrance, everyone knows very well, is our mouth and nose. Where's the exit? Devers glanced at everyone. Some people will say it's the vagina because there's fart. There was another burst of laughter below. Of course not. It can even be said that the air that enters our mouths has little to do with the fart that comes out. As Devers spoke, he turned sideways to face a wooden mannequin that was the same size as a human. Thanks to the doctors of the medical school for their unremitting research on human anatomy, and the exquisite skills of the tourist craftsmen, we've created the most realistic and exquisite model of the human body in the world. Next, I'll use this model to talk to everyone. Chapter 352. Because of this, Dionia was the ideal place for Greek doctors. Devers pried open the skin of the model's lower jaw and neck to reveal the passage inside. Look, the passage for the mouth and the nose are combined here, and then divided into two passages. He pointed at the soft tube made of tanned leather. We all know that the nose is used for breathing air, but the mouth not only breathes air, but also eats and drinks water. Air and food go through their own passages. After a long period of observation, the doctors of the medical school thought that this passage was air and called it the trachea. The other passage behind it goes through food and water. We call it the esophagus. Everyone touched the lower part of their neck. The hard and uneven part under the skin was the trachea. The foreign doctors under the podium touched their necks to feel the trachea mentioned by Devers. Some people might ask, if the opening of the esophagus and trachea are connected, wouldn't it be easy for food and water to enter the trachea? Devers said. Seeing many people nodding, he smiled and said, in fact, this is almost impossible. There is a very soft bone at the opening of the trachea. When we swallow, it will automatically cover the opening of the trachea, preventing food and water from entering the trachea. If you are interested, you can come and take a look at it after the meeting. The craftsmen of Dionia, under the guidance of the doctors, have made this model with exquisite skills. It is quite accurate. However, don't damage it. This model is the treasure of the medical school. No matter how much money you spend, you can't buy it. Am I right, Helps? Yes, Teacher Devers. Usually, we only use it during teaching. Usually, we don't let people touch it. Helps smiled. After hearing what Devers and Helps said, the foreign doctors couldn't help but stand up and look at the model next to Devers. The scene was a little messy. Devers continued to ask, I heard that the young Dr. Kratos from the medical school discovered this cartilage. For this reason, he specially dissected living pigs and sheep and carefully observed the movement and mechanism of this cartilage, right? Yes. Helps nodded. Is he here today? Devers asked with a smile. He's here. Then, Dr. Kratos, please stand up and introduce him to everyone, Devers said loudly with a smile. Kratos stood up shyly after being nudged by his colleague. Let's give Kratos a round of applause for this important discovery. Devers was the first to applaud, followed by a round of applause. His classmates even whistled excitedly. Kratos was nervous and excited. Lycasus looked enviously at Kratos, who was standing in front of him. The doctor, who looked about the same age as him, was shyly accepting the applause of the audience. When could he be as famous as him in Greece, instead of being an apprentice like a slave? Kratos, I look forward to you making more discoveries in medicine and making greater achievements. Devers encouraged him enthusiastically. The scene of a young man encouraging another young man with the tone of an elder seemed a little ridiculous, but most of the doctors present did not think so. Kratos, on the other hand, was so excited that his chest rose and fell rapidly. Oh, okay, Teacher Devers. After Kratos sat down, Devers continued, if you don't eat carefully and suddenly choke, it's actually because the cartilage did not cover the trachea in time, allowing food to enter the trachea. If a mother comes to you with a baby and tells you that the baby chokes and coughs when drinking milk, it may also be because of this reason. Devers's words were memorized by the foreign doctor, confirming similar cases he had seen before. Air enters an organ through the trachea. After many dissections, the Dionia School of Medicine called this trachea a lung. Devers opened the chest of the mannequin, removed the left lung carved out of wood, and showed it to everyone. In the end, the medical school found that there is a lung on the left and right side of our body. It's like the pig's urinary bladder that children play with. When you inhale, air enters, and when you exhale, air is expelled, and the lung shrinks. You may find it strange that air enters the lungs from the mouth and nose, and then exhales from the lungs through the mouth. It seems to be meaningless. But let me tell you, our body is the most precious treasure that the gods have given to the world. It is very wonderful, and it will never do meaningless things. Devers looked around at the doctors in the audience. Seeing that they were all listening attentively, he said seriously, "After many dissections, the medical school found that after the trachea enters the lungs, it continues to separate into smaller tubes, just like the branches of a big tree." "How big is the trachea that we can see in the end?" Devers pulled out a strand of hair from his head and said, "It's only this big. But what is the end of such a small trachea? Who can tell me?" At this time, a young doctor from Dionia stood up. "It's the blood vessels. When we dissected the trachea, we found that many of the same small blood vessels were intertwined with the trachea. These small blood vessels were formed by the continuous differentiation of two large blood vessels from the heart." "Then, what is the use of these two large blood vessels from the heart?" Devers continued to ask. "They come from different parts of the heart. One is responsible for pumping blood into the lungs, and the other is responsible for collecting blood from the lungs." "What other obvious differences are there?" "Well, one blood vessel pumps blood out, and two blood vessels collect blood." The young doctor answered hesitantly. "There are differences. Is there anything else?" The young doctor blushed and couldn't answer. "Thank you for your answer. What's your name?" "Strobus from Dionia School of Medicine." "Thank you for your wonderful answer. You said it very well." Strobus, who was slightly depressed, smiled when he heard Devers's praise. "Everyone, the air goes in and out of the lungs, the blood goes in and out of the lungs, and the blood goes back to the heart. If nothing happens, then our bodies are so bored that we're doing these meaningless things all the time." "Is it possible?" Devers asked. While everyone was deep in thought, he answered firmly, "Of course it's impossible. The air and blood must have some strange reaction in the lungs, but we can't see it with our naked eyes, just like how we can't see what causes our wounds to be infected. So what is this reaction? How important is it to our bodies?" The doctors all showed great interest when they heard this. While thinking, they pricked up their ears to listen to Devers's next words. Devers smiled. "Although I don't know what reaction the air and blood have, we can discover the existence of this reaction through certain phenomena. Herpes, have you carefully observed the blood of humans or animals? Have you noticed anything different about the blood?" Blood. Herpes was deep in thought. To be honest, Devers had not told him the topic of today's speech. Like everyone else, he was used to transparent air and didn't think deeply about it. In addition, he had been the director of the Ministry of Health for the past 2 years, and he also served as the director of the Turii Hospital and the director of the Dionia School of Medicine. The administrative work had increased, and he didn't have time to do medical research. Next to him, Stesichordas was also deep in thought. Someone suddenly thought of something and shouted, "It's the color! The color of blood!" Devers fixed his eyes on the person who spoke. It was Kratos. He looked at the thoughtful and creative young doctor with admiration, and then quickly retracted his gaze. "Yes, it's the color of blood. Doctors of the medical school, as long as you've done animal vivisection, you'll find that when the originally dark blood enters the lungs and is brought back to the heart by another blood vessel, the blood has turned bright. There are only air and blood flowing in the lungs, so something in the air must have entered the blood, and that's why the color of the blood has changed. And this thing, what does this invisible thing do when it enters the blood?" Herpes, Stesichordas, Kratos, all the doctors, including Lycasus, were staring at Devers at this moment, holding their breath, lest they miss a word. Chapter 353. When Devers finished his speech, all the doctors in the audience stood up and bowed to him. Then they began to clap. They clapped with all their might, and the applause continued. The words "wonderful" and "creative" could not describe Devers's speech. He had pushed the medical theories of this era to a more profound and vaster world. If the doctors of the past were only groping their way forward in the dark, then every speech of Devers was like a beam of light that they could follow to move forward. There were no words to describe the shock and gratitude in the doctors' hearts. This was the only way to express their emotions. Even Nikyus Tratus was one of them. Although he did not know much about human anatomy, he was finally sure that the true mystery of medicine was here, in the school of Dionia, in the Devers. Devers bowed again and again in return. The applause continued. The 3-day medical exchange forum finally ended. Some foreign doctors left, while others applied to stay to continue visiting and learning. This included Nikyus Tratus and Stasippus. For the next few days, they worked as assistants in the Turii hospital, learning how Dionia doctors treated patients and occasionally watching them perform surgeries. As for the systematic study of medical theories, human anatomy, and so on, the school of Dionia had very strict requirements. Students had to be citizens of Dionia, prospective citizens, or free people who had left their motherland and applied for citizenship of Dionia. At the same time, they had to pass the rigorous examinations of the School of Medicine before they could enter the School of Medicine. The extreme Nikyus Tratus had a characteristic. Once he agreed with something, he would be much more enthusiastic than ordinary people. He was conquered by Dionia medicine and wanted to stay here. However, it was not easy for a citizen of Crotone to join Dionia. He had a family like him, so he had to go back and discuss it. Nikyus Tratus' attitude even influenced Stasippus. He also considered staying to study. On this day, the two decided to visit the pharmacy in Turii. After visiting the pharmacy in the city, they heard that there was a larger, more complete, and more medicinal market in the port, so they decided to take a look. Today's Turii port was different from a few years ago. Although it was not as good as the deep-water port of Crotone, it did not have the natural ability to withstand storms like the port of Tarentum, and it did not have the superior location of the port of Ligium. It had become the largest port in Greece. The reason was simple. The city-state alliance of Dionia had become the well-deserved hegemon of southern Italy, and its strength far exceeded that of other city-states. As the center of the alliance, Turii had a strong political advantage. Many free people wanted to move into Turii and become citizens of Dionia. Many envoys and Senate members of the Greek city-states came to Turii to visit, ask for help, and negotiate with the Senate. Many merchants and tourists came to experience the unique culture of Dionia, to enjoy the unique ball games, celebrations, and even food and entertainment. Not to mention the citizens of Dionia who moved to Turii from 9 to 5. The huge flow of people naturally created a huge demand, and this demand could not be completely met by Turii itself. Therefore, merchants who were good at seizing business opportunities came with merchant ships loaded with goods from all directions. The port and market of Turii expanded again and again. Now, it had expanded from the mouth of the Krati River to the north near the Temple of Hera. Nikyus Tratus and the others passed the Temple of Hera and entered the area of the port market. They soon felt that it was difficult to walk. Although Turii had built several roads between the main city and the port market, and vehicles and pedestrians had to go their own way, the huge flow of people still caused traffic to become congested. Walking in the middle of the road, people brushed shoulders with each other. Although it was still warm spring, Nikyus Tratus and the others were already sweating profusely. At this moment, a group of patrolling soldiers passed by. The quick-witted Lucasus hurriedly brought the two of them to follow behind. With the patrolling soldiers clearing the way in front, they felt a little more relaxed. The port of Turii had actually developed into a large town. It was divided into two parts. One was the port and the other was the market. The two were separated by a stone wall guarded by guards. The cargo ships entered the port and anchored at the pier. After unloading the goods, they were transported directly to the market. They were either stored in warehouses or put on sale in shop. The market was strictly planned by the commercial officer of Dionia, Marigi, into straight street. On both sides of the streets were a series of shops, warehouses, and workshop. The same type of goods or commodities were placed on sale in one or more streets as much as possible. This made it easier for management and for the people to trade. In the port of Turiae alone there were several streets or little markets, famous in Magna Graecia, and even in the whole of southern Italy, where the same commodity was sold, formed by several streets. For example, the Stone Market. For the Dionia Alliance, which was passionate about building roads and temples, and also owned several stone mines in their territory, this industry was very prosperous. Not only did they have a variety of quality marble, but there were also many laborers engaged in this industry, and the price was relatively low. And matching this was the Sculpture Street. The statues in the temples, the monumental pillars in the squares, and the stone tablets on both sides of the street attracted and gave birth to a large number of sculptors engaged in this industry. However, because there had yet to be a sculpture that could shock the whole of Greece, there had yet to be a master sculptor. Most of them produced middle and low-end sculptures. The weapons market was also very famous. The people of Dionia conquered Greece by force, so of course, they attached great importance to the production and sale of weapons. In order to gain merit, the people were willing to invest money in this area. So, hundreds of weapon workshops and shops of all sizes had gathered in the port market. Half of them came from other Greek city-states outside the alliance. Among them there were two most famous ones. One was the Armory of the Disabled Soldiers Committee under the Ministry of Military Affairs, and the other was the Armory of Dios. There was also a very famous market, the livestock market, since the two mountain races of Lucania and Bruttii, who mainly relied on livestock, joined the Dionia alliance. Dionia also owned Lucania and Bruttii, two plateaus and mountains with rich pasture resources. In addition, Christoia's restaurant was widely spread in various cities of the Dionia alliance. More than half of its recipes were made from cattle, sheep, and other livestock. This gave rise to a great demand for meat in Dionia. While gradually changing their diet, it also prompted the two regions of Lucania and Bruttii to raise cattle and sheep and other livestock in large numbers. The livestock produced in these two regions were not only large in number, but also delicious. The southern Greeks who had tasted the delicacies of Christoia's restaurant loved it. In fact, a long time ago, the Lucanian cattle were known for their docility, strength, and endurance. They became the first choice of pack cattle in this area. At the same time, although the Bruttii horse was not good at running, it was good at climbing mountains, and it was a good pack horse. It was also quite popular in Greece. In recent years, under the guidance of the Senate's policy, the Bruttii region began to raise a large number of horses. Most of the horses used in the carriages of Dionia came from the livestock market of the Bruttii in the port of Turiae. There was also a street that was unique to Dionia and quite famous in southern Italy, the ball market. Rugby and football were first played in the Dionia barrack. Later, they became popular throughout the Dionia Alliance and the Confederacy. Every year, a city match was held. However, the people were not satisfied with only one match per year. Therefore, under the proposal of the Devers, the Senate introduced a new bill last year, allowing citizens of each city, please note, only citizens, to organize their own rugby or football teams. After reporting to the City Hall, the city's chief executive would organize the rugby or football games in each city. Rugby or football games would be played about every 10 days in a single round-robin tournament. A win was worth 3 points, a loss was worth 0, and a draw was worth 1 point. The team with the highest points would become the city champion and would be sent to Turiae to participate in the Southern Italy finals. The rugby finals were held after the Hades celebration ceremony on September 9th every year. The football finals were held on November 1st every year to celebrate the establishment of the Confederacy. The overall rugby or football champion of the year would be decided. The participating teams also included some city-state teams of the Confederacy. However, some city-states were invited but had never participated, such as Tarentum and Crotone. As a result, most of the citizens of Dionia were both participants and spectators. The arena was always full of spectators for every game. The people's enthusiasm for such games surpassed watching plays, and it became their main form of entertainment. The so-called investment of the people naturally led to the popularity of the industry. From small things like the piccolo that the referee spoke of to big things like the goal used in the game, as long as it was involved in rugby or football games, it was sold on this street. At the same time, it also included some other competitive sports supplies. The most surprising thing was that there were many famous players' supplies stores on this street. The popularity of the football market would naturally give birth to some players with superb skills. Some of them shone in various city games, and some even dominated the Dionia finals. Naturally, there would be people who would chase after them and regard them as idols. Therefore, such stores came into being. There were famous players' statues, dolls, and sportswear marked with their names and numbers, made of various materials and sizes. There was everything one could think of. It showed the prosperity of this street. Chapter 354. In all of Greece, only the Dionia Federation, with the full support and help of Devers, an archon who had more than 2,000 years of medical knowledge, vigorously trained doctors, built hospitals, medical schools, and in-depth research on treatment and medication. This made the medical industry in Dionia, especially in Thurii, flourish, far ahead of other Mediterranean city-states and countries in this era. Therefore, the medicinal herb street in the port market of Thurii was unique in the entire Mediterranean world. However, although this street was very famous in southern Italy, it was not as crowded as other streets. After all, most of the people who purchased medicinal herbs were doctors and pharmacy staff. Patients basically got their medicine from the pharmacies in the city, and rarely came to the market to buy such unprocessed medicinal herbs. High-quality talents, such as doctors, only accounted for a small proportion of the citizens of Dionia. Therefore, when Nix and Tratus, who had just squeezed through the crowd, came to this street, they immediately felt a lot more relaxed. They curiously toured the shops one by one, watching and consulting. As they walked, they came to a relatively large pharmacy and found that the owner was a British man. He was bargaining with the customer with a stiff Greek pronunciation. "Lord Olivers, I know you are from the Ministry of Military Affairs, and you buy a lot of horse-bite fruit from me every year, that's true. But this year, you bought it a little too early, and the quantity is so large. You must know that the snow on the Cosenza Plateau has not completely melted, and only the horse-bite grass that grows in the lower terrain has borne fruit. There are not many of them, so of course the price is higher. If you think it's too expensive, why don't you wait until summer? At that time, the price of the horse-bite fruit will drop." "Wait until summer? I'm afraid I won't be able to wait until that day. Lord Capus will ask me to get lost." The customer sneered. "I'd better go to another shop to buy it." After that, he turned around and was about to leave. "Wait!" The owner hurriedly stopped him, hesitated, and finally gritted his teeth and said, "Seeing that the soldiers of Brity often participate in training and also need to drink this fruit to quench their thirst, I'm willing to reduce the price by one more opal. Lord Olivers, I've really suffered a loss this time." Olivers's anger immediately turned into a smile. "Agam, it's just 1 opal less per kilogram, isn't it? These things are everywhere in the Cosenza Highlands. You don't need to spend a single opal. They're all free. What's there to feel bad about?" Agam smiled bitterly and said, "Lord Olivers, picking the horse-bite fruit is not as easy as you make it out to be. As soon as spring warms up, the women of our tribe have to tread on the slippery mountain roads to pick the fruit. They have to risk being hurt by the wild beasts that come out to hunt for food, and they have to compete with other tribes. Until now, 2 women have broken their legs and are lying in the hospital. After the fruits are plucked, they have to be dried in the sun. Unfortunately, it often rains in spring, so we can only use the stove to bake them. The money we work so hard to earn still has to feed thousands of people in the tribe. It's really not easy." Olivers didn't care about his complaints and said coldly, "Do you care about your tribe? Or do you care less about the number of times you go to the brothel if you have less money?" Agam's expression changed. He quickly said, "Don't talk nonsense." Oliver's patted his chest and said softly, "We're both men. I understand." Agam looked around and did not say anything. "Brothers, pick 300 kilograms of horse-bite fruit and get ready to take it away," Oliver's shouted. Immediately, a dozen strong soldiers came in and squatted on the ground to pick the fruit. Agam could not help but say, "No need to pick. They're all real horse-bite fruit. The quality is good. The port's market management won't allow us to fake it. I still want to do business here for a long time." Olivers looked at him and smiled. "You're right. For the sake of Chief Saru, I should believe you. Then you can weigh 300 kilograms of fruits for us." Olivers then said to the soldiers, "I'm going to walk around somewhere else. After the fruits are weighed, you guys can carry them back to the training camp." "Yes, Captain." Olivers walked to the door and thought of something. He turned back and said, "Agam, Master Devers talked to me yesterday. He specifically talked about the harvesting of medicinal herbs. He said, we can't overdo the harvesting of medicinal herbs. Otherwise, these plants will decrease or even disappear." At the mention of Devers, Agam immediately became respectful. Master Devers is really knowledgeable. Others can't compare to him. But, Master Olivers, you underestimate us broody people. We've lived on the highlands for generations. The streams, trees, and flowers in the mountains are all gifts from the highland goddess, Amara, to us broody people. If we take too much from the highlands, we'll face Amara's wrath." Olivers laughed and said, "That's good. That's good." After that, he glanced at Nixstratus and left. Agam ordered the slaves to weigh the horseshoe fruit for the soldiers. Nixstratus, Stassippus, and Lycasus took the opportunity to observe the small but hard red fruit. "What's the use of this fruit?" Stassippus asked politely. "Oh, this fruit is called horseshoe fruit. It used to be everywhere in our highlands. No one cared about it. Only horses liked to eat it when they were tired. Later, the doctors in Turin studied it. They said that it can quench thirst and relieve fatigue. That's why it's worth a lot of money. For the past 2 years, the Ministry of Military Affairs of Dionia has bought thousands of kilograms of fruit from me every time. They drink it after the military training. It's very useful. You guys aren't from Dionia, right? Buy some and try it." Agam patiently tried to sell it to them. "We're from Crotone." Nixstratus suddenly interrupted. Agam replied with an "oh." He didn't show any special emotion. It was as if the hatred between Crotone and broody people was already a thing of the past. "How much for 500 grams?" 6 opal. "Give me 500 grams, Stassippus said as he took out his money pouch. Agam held a handful of red fruits in his hands and poured them into a straw pouch. It already weighed more than 500 grams. "Including this pouch, I'll give you 7 opal." "All right. What's the use of this grass?" Nixstratus asked curiously as he stood beside a pile of withered grass that looked like thorns. "That's thorny grass. The doctors in Turin discovered that crushing it and soaking it in hot water can relieve itchiness. It's good stuff. This thing can cure itchiness." Nixstratus carefully touched the thorns on the grass, looking doubtful. "The doctors in Turin are all the students of Lord Devers, the descendants of the god of death. They're all skilled in medicine, just like your Greek god of medicine. Asclepius. Yes, that's the Greek god. These amazing Turin doctors' words can't be false. Plus, we've tested it and it's indeed effective. Now, this grass is often ordered by pharmacies. Nowadays, every tribe in Brudi will tell the doctors in Turin if they have any methods to cure illnesses passed down by their ancestors. I heard that the Lucanians are doing the same. Lord Devers is indeed the descendant of God. He made all the wild flowers and grass in our mountains into treasures." Agam said with both gratitude and admiration. Nixstratus and Stassippus looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock. Through these few days of learning, They learned that Dionia's medical school was far ahead of other city-states in terms of medical theory research, experience in diagnosis and treatment, and the development of surgery. They didn't expect that they had done so much in the field of medicine as well. Just then, Lycasus ran into the shop and said excitedly, "Teacher, there's a shop selling the surgical tools you mentioned last time." "Really? Take me there." Nycstratus dropped the thorny grass in his hand and ran out with Lycasus. Then, Stassippus picked up the straw bag and went out as well. After watching the three of them leave, Aga muttered, "The people of Crotone." The shop selling surgical tools next to Britty's herb shop was small, but there were all kinds of intricately crafted tools made of iron and wood. They were all carefully arranged. After Nycstratus and the others entered the shop, they looked at it happily for a while before the shop owner asked, "Are you doctors from Dionia?" "No, we're from Crotone." "Then you can only look, not buy." "Why?" Lycasus looked at him indignantly. "These tools are all designed by the Turin Hospital and sent to the ironware workshop to make them. They made such a request, and the port market management is in charge of supervising. We can't do anything about it." The shop owner shrugged and said helplessly, "Can't we pay more?" Stassippus asked tentatively, "Don't set me up. I don't want to have any stains on my Turin's records." The shop owner rolled his eyes. "Stathippus, come and see." Nycstratus picked up a sharp knife the size of a leaf and said loudly, "This is the knife that Professor Herpes uses to cut the skin during surgery. This is..." Chapter 355. How much does it cost to buy a set of these surgical instruments? Stassippus asked the shopkeeper. "A set?" The shopkeeper pursed his lips. "You're a doctor from another country. You don't understand that doctors in Dionia will use different surgical instruments depending on the type of surgery they perform. Moreover, the Dionia School of Medicine will send new surgical instruments to us from time to time. With these surgical instruments in this shop, we can perform at least 5 or 6 different types of surgery. Even if you can buy them." The shopkeeper looked at the three of them and rolled his eyes. "You can't afford them." "We can't afford them? Tell me, how much do these cost?" At this moment, Nycstratus also came over and said unhappily. The shopkeeper glanced at him, pointed to the shop and said, "The things you picked up just now are worth about 30 minas. 30 minas? Just a few small things were worth 30 minas. You're robbing us!" Lycasus shouted in shock. "Don't talk nonsense if you don't know anything." The shopkeeper was obviously a liar. He argued, "Do you know how difficult it is to make those things? Do you know how high the requirements are? Let me tell you, the time it takes to make a knife like that is enough for us to make 30 bronze shields, and it needs to be made by the best blacksmith. Only then can we make the surgical instruments that meet the requirements of those doctors. As they said, the tools used to cut a person's body must be very fine. Otherwise, it won't be saving lives, it'll be killing people. So tell me, how can the price not be high? Besides, these tools aren't something that just any ironware workshop can produce. In Tulii, only our Theos Weapons Workshop has the ability to do so." The three of them were speechless. "Also, what I just said is the previous price. They are now priced at 40 minas. Why? Because in the future, our workshop will not be producing these surgical instruments." "Why is that?" "Our workshop has received a major task from Dionia's Ministry of Roads and Transport. They want to build a stone bridge, and they need to place huge iron bars into the river to empty the river so that they can use boulders and stone slurry, actually, Devers cement, to cast the bridge piers. Therefore, our workshop needs to gather all the casters and high-quality iron ore to make these big guys." While the three of them were happily touring the port market, Ephialtes and his wife were riding north in a carriage to the hot springs of the Tyrol, a tributary of the Cosine River. The Devers became famous in this battle, annihilating the allied forces of the Lucania tribe, thus laying the cornerstone of the establishment of the Dionia alliance. At that time, the great river beach was littered with corpses. Now, a white memorial pillar 20 meters high and 2 meters in diameter was erected. The scene of the battle was carved on it, and at the top was a bronze statue of the Devers holding a shield and a spear. This memorial pillar for the victory of the Great River Beach battle was initially called the Pillar of Miracles by the people. It symbolized the victory of the Dionia consul, who was outnumbered, creating a miracle in an impossible situation. Later, students from various cities in the Alliance were often brought here by teachers to let them experience the hardships of the establishment of Dionia and the greatness of the Devers. It was also nicknamed the Pillar of Children by the citizens. It was not only a place for children to receive education, but it also had a deeper meaning. Since the battle, the Dionia Alliance began to grow healthily like a newborn baby. Of course, this was a story for another time. There was a large circular tomb not far from the memorial pillar. The tombstone was engraved with the words, "Tomb of the warriors who died in the Great River Beach battle." Below it was an inscription by the Devers, "The war is in the past, the blood is won." 2 bronze statues of men were erected in front of the tomb. From their attire, one could tell that one was a Lucanian and the other a Greek. They were smiling and holding each other's strong arms. The Greek man's left hand was pointing at Tulii, which was 20 miles away in the east, making an inviting gesture. The meaning behind it was self-evident. There were no bones in the tomb. Back then, the Turii cremated the bones of thousands of Lucanian warriors. It was said that the incineration alone took 3 days and 3 nights. Then, the ashes were poured into the river and fed to the fish and shrimp. Later, the Dionia Union was established. Out of political purposes and under the strong suggestion of the Devers, this tomb was built. Every year, people would come here to pay their respects, most of them Lucanians. Of course, this was not the main reason why this once desolate area had become lively now. Instead, it was the other side of the Tyros River that the Devers statue spear was pointing at. The once barren pools and hot spring swamps that were infested with snakes and insects were now replaced by a huge building. Dozens of aqueducts made of Devers cement led the hot spring water that emerged from the cracks in the rocks into the building. Finally, a large channel led the hot spring water that flowed into the building into the river. This was the famous Turii hot spring baths in all of Greece. The Greeks did not like to bathe, but the people of Dionia had developed the habit of bathing under the long-term preaching of doctors led by helps in the hospital over the past few years. They also knew that bathing in hot spring water was more beneficial to the body. Therefore, on the opening day of the big baths, almost all the men of Turii came to the hot spring swamps to have a try. As a result, the baths were overcrowded. Later on, the big baths even changed the rules for this, setting a time limit and limiting the number of people who could enter. After the Turii men who soaked in the hot spring and enjoyed all kinds of novel services returned to the city reluctantly, they began to proclaim how wonderful it was to bathe in the big baths. They even praised that this was an Elysium built by Sir Consul in the human world. Not long after, the people also found out that this baths actually allowed women to enter. Since then, the people of Turii would go to the big baths every day and regarded it as an essential enjoyment in their lives. The people of other Dionia cities would also come to enjoy it from time to time. At the same time, the Turii people also regarded the hot spring baths as one of the 3 major entertainment activities to entertain distinguished guests from afar. The other 2 were tasting Turii cuisine and watching ball games in the arena. Since then, the reputation of the Turii hot spring had spread far and wide. On certain special days in Dionia, the big baths would be free of charge to the people. This made the already cheap baths, only 1 opal, even more popular among the people. For example, these few days, due to the arrival of the marriage festival, the big baths were free of charge to all the couples who came to bathe. This was also the reason why Ephiart brought his wife here. There were many couples who came to the big baths today. Everyone consciously formed a long line and slowly moved towards the entrance of the baths. At this moment, There was a commotion at the back of the line. Offa turned his head to see what was going on. "What happened?" asked his wife curiously. "Nothing, it seems like 2 senators from the Senate are here too," said Ephiart nonchalantly. There were almost 100 senators in the Senate. Other than the people of Turii, the people of Dionia from other cities only knew the chief senator, Daves, the senators who had served as the city's governor, and the elders who held important positions in the army. This was not strange. Whether it was training or fighting, the people who served would naturally have a deep impression of these officers. Finally, they crossed the wooden bridge over the Tyrol River and stood at the entrance. The caretaker glanced at Ephiart and his wife and asked, "Are you husband and wife?" The two nodded. "Citizens of Dionia?" Ephiart nodded again and said, "We are also the couples who are participating in the marriage festival this year. May I ask if there are any private rooms with small baths?" As he spoke, he extended his left hand, and his wife extended her right hand. On her ring finger was an iron ring with Hera's emblem, peacock, engraved on it. Because of the Devers' suggestion, the Hera temple that Agnes was in charge of not only hosted the celebration, but also awarded rings blessed by Hera to the newlyweds who participated in the celebration, with a small processing fee, of course, in order to encourage and supervise the stability of their marriages. "Congratulations!" After the caretaker confirmed it, he turned around and looked at the wooden wall that had many long nails nailed into it. Only one of them had a key hanging on it. He took it down and placed it in Ephiart's hands. "Hera blesses you. There is still one last key left. The room number is written on the wooden plate. After entering the room, lock the door, and no one will disturb you. Return the key at noon." "All right, thank you." Ephiart led his wife into the middle passage, and the 2 passages on the left and right each led to the men's and women's baths. As time passed, the long queue at the entrance was almost at the end. When the caretaker of the baths saw the 2 people in front of him, he was momentarily stunned, but immediately put on a smile. "Lord Polixus, Lord Enanilus, is there a private room?" Polixus asked straightforwardly. The caretaker pointed at the wooden wall behind him that only had iron nails left, and said apologetically, "Because of the marriage festival, the rooms are all full." The corner of Polixus's mouth twitched in dissatisfaction. Ignoring the fact that the caretaker was an employee of the Devers, he said sarcastically, "Look at our Lord Archon. He really knows how to take care of the people of Dionia." Enanilus did not reply. He asked the slave behind him to take out 4 opers, and paid for himself, Polixus, and 2 of his personal slaves. After they entered, the caretaker used the excuse of urinating to go to the back room, and quickly found the manager of the large baths. "Polixus and Enanilus, come take a bath together." After walking along the passage on the left for a short distance, a vast area appeared in front of them. There was a large pool in the middle, and there were a few small pools beside it, all steaming hot and surrounded by mist. Chapter 356. Although the bathing area was a little crowded due to the large number of people, it did not make people feel suffocated, because apart from the thick and tall stone walls, the bathing area did not have a roof, which was conducive to the circulation of air. Some people even liked to take a bath here when it was raining. Polixus looked at the crowded bathing area in front of him and said enviously, "I estimate that 5,000 or 6,000 people come here to take a bath in a day. The Devers make a lot of money." "Who told you not to join when the consul raised the money?" Nanilus retorted, then took off his shoes and gave them to the slaves. Stepping on the smooth marble floor, he strode towards the hot spring pool. Polixus hurried to follow. Nanilus slowly sat in the pool, and the comfortable water temperature made him heave a long sigh of relief. He cupped the spring water and thoroughly wet his head and face. The people walking back and forth in front of him blocked people's sight, so no one would notice that the 2 senators were sitting naked in the middle of them. Nanilus closed his eyes, leaned against the wall, and seemed to be asleep, which made Polixus swallow his words a few times. After more than 10 minutes in the large hot spring pool, Nannilus came to a small pool next to it. The water was not deep, and the bottom of the pool was covered with sand. The other small pool was paved with pebbles, and the bottom of the other small pool was covered with river mud. Nannilus simply lay down and rubbed his back with the soft sand. After another 10 minutes of soaking, until his skin was already red, he got out of the pool and asked a slave to massage his body. After another 10 minutes, Nannilus got up. After asking the slave to pay for the massage, he dragged his limp body and staggered to an empty corner, sat on a bench by the window, and closed his eyes to rest. Polixus came to sit beside him, stretched, and said, "It's really comfortable to take a bath in the hot spring. You don't say. The bathing area built by the Devers has really brought great benefits to the tourists. Why didn't we think of doing this in the past? As expected of the beloved of God." Nannilus slowly opened his eyes, looked at him, and slowly said, "Since you know how powerful Devers is, you still often lead the opposition to him in the Senate. I don't remember you being so bold before, Polixus." Seeing that Nannilus was finally talking to him, Polixus breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, but he said with an aggrieved expression, "Of course I know that without the Devers, the Dionia Alliance wouldn't have the status it has today. I also wanted to do something with Devers, but he didn't give me a chance. He only valued his mercenaries, who only knew how to talk with their fists, and allowed them, who were illiterate, to hold high positions. There were also the barbarian leaders, who were even more barbaric. They sat in the Senate every day and yelled in Greek that no one could understand, with a foul smell all over their bodies. There were also the Amandorians, who used to be driven by us, who wore the badge of the so-called primitive citizen every day, deliberately showing off in front of us. We are the real owners of the city of Turris, but now we can only stand aside in the Senate. Me, Orpheus, Massasakus. We only put on the coat of senators for the tourists to see, but in fact, we are no different from ordinary citizens." Nannilus glanced around, and no one in the crowded and noisy bathing area noticed the difference between the two of them. He reminded in a deep voice, "You are too excited, lower your voice. Polixus, you just haven't had your turn yet, maybe by next year, you will be the governor of a city." Polixus sneered, "Nannilus, you don't have to comfort me, even you don't believe your own words. Think about it, a Persia can sit in this important position for so many years, without any rotation or election. Do you think my ability is worse than his? I was also one of the 10 generals of the Turris many times. Because I had nothing to do in the Senate, sometimes I was sent by the Devers to help this foreigner, and I was ordered by him. Is the alliance of Dionia still a place for us real Turris?" Nannilus opened his mouth, but did not speak. "Of course, you might say, you, Buccos, Ansitanos, and Pleasonus are all highly valued by the Senate." Polixus sneered, "How can Pleasonus compare to us? He is just a civilian, and now he is completely a dog of the Devers. The Devers use him to bite people. Ansitanos, on the other hand, is completely focused on the book he is writing, and does not care about anything else. In fact, he does not have much power. Buccos, on the other hand, has been serving as an agricultural officer, but he has to deal with peasants and slaves every day. How many times can he return to the city of Turris in a month? Sometimes he can't even attend important Senate meetings. Rather than being a senator, I think he is more like an ordinary civil servant of the Alliance. As for you, Nannilus, you do have the power of the navy, but, at this point, Polixus deliberately paused. Nannilus turned his head and asked casually, "But what?" Polixus chuckled and said, "In recent years, the Devers have allowed foreigners to build shipyards in Turris, breaking your family's monopoly on shipbuilding. What do you think?" Nannilus's eyebrows twitched and he slowly said, "That's because the territory of Dionia is too vast and we need more warships to protect our coast, and my family can't produce so many warships in a short period of time." "Oh, you are really considerate of the Alliance." Polixus said sarcastically, and looked at him sharply. Unfortunately, the Devers did not seem to thank you. As for the fact that he allowed the family of his second wife to obtain more warships than your family, what do you think about this? Enanilus was silent. His skin that was scalded by the hot spring water covered the embarrassment on his face. He was very clear. Due to his family's monopoly on shipbuilding, it led to lax management, which led to many quality problems in the completed warship. Because of this, the Devers had a few private talks with him, which was why the Senate later passed the Devers Bill to allow merchants from the Alliance to build shipyards in Turris. Also, the hero who conquered Ciudad Abyssinia, the standard-bearer at the triumphal parade, and whose statue is in the Hall of Valhalla, in just a few years, quickly rose from an ordinary sailor to the commander of your fleet, and often went in and out of the Devers mansion. What do you think about this? Polixus' next question caused Enanilus's expression to change. The Devers made you the commander of the navy because he had no choice but to use you. He didn't have anyone under him who understood naval warfare. But now he seems to have found one, and he seems to be much more trustworthy than you. Enanilus, do you think the Devers still need a former Turris nobleman like you who doesn't fit in with his boorish mercenaries? Polixus' words were like a poisonous snake biting at Enanilus's already restless heart. Polixus had been staring at Enanilus' face, and at this moment, he sighed. If we old tourists don't think of something, I'm afraid we can only become spectators in the Senate, doing nothing until we die of old age. I can't accept this. Enanilus clenched his fist, shaking his head and said, Polixus, you don't understand the strength of the Devers. Even the sailors of the Dionia navy that I lead, consisting of preparatory citizens and freedmen, see that young man as the true commander, and I'm just an executor. Not to mention the soldiers and generals of the Dionia army. Enanilus, what are you thinking? Do you think I'm plotting to overthrow the Devers? Polixus interrupted him, shaking his head with a chuckle. No. I'm not that stupid. We have to admit that the Devers made a great contribution to the Dionia alliance. Without him, the Turris would have long ceased to exist. We're just trying to get back some rights for the citizens of Dionia, and at the same time limit some of the Devers' power. We don't want him to treat us old Turris coldly. Polixus pointed at the men in the baths with a slightly agitated expression and said, Do you think they don't want to participate in the assembly? The blood of the Greeks flows with a passion for politics. It's just that the glory of the Devers made them temporarily forget it. As long as someone keeps reminding them, just like what I've been doing, then the situation will change a lot. Didn't the protests of the citizens of Turris, Cremissa, and other cities show that the situation is changing? Enanilus, for our own sake, and for the sake of the Dionia alliance, are you willing to join me in the Senate to continue to insist on the assembly, so that the distribution of power in Dionia will be fairer? Listening to Polixus's provocative words, Enanilus's expression kept changing, and finally he said hesitantly, But there are too few senators in the Senate who support this proposal. Actually, there are quite a few. I've already gained the support of some people. Polixus whispered a few words in Enanilus's ear. Enanilus was shocked. Really? Just like the last time I told you how to free the slaves to get more land, when have I ever lied to you? Polixus reminded. Enanilus clenched his hands again, and finally clenched them into fists. Respected senators, I have a proposal. Polixus stood up from his seat.